right, the time is 5:30. We're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Mr. Billingsley, can you go ahead and have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Hughes.
Here.
Councilmember Cordes.
Here.
Councilmember Larson.
Here.
Councilmember Wall. Councilmember Hawkins.
Here.
Vice Mayor Anderson.
Here.
Mayor Walter.
Here.
Madam Mayor, we have a quorum.
All right, thank you so much. At this time, we're going to go ahead and open the work session on Certificate of Need for Ambulance Service. Chief David Strayer.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council. As you recall, a few weeks ago, council had a strategic planning session during which the survey results were released, a community survey, during which one of the questions that was posed to the community is the issue of fire ambulance transport. And as I recall, it was 60% of the community voted in favor of that. So council directed the manager, who directed me, to put a study session together on this topic. I can tell you that there's a lot of communities in Arizona, Gilbert, Queen Creek, Mesa, Surprise, Goodyear, Casa Grande just got it approved, that are obtaining their certificates of need, which is really the primary thing we're going to talk about tonight. And they're doing that so they can control their own destiny in this area of EMS service delivery, and gives them options in terms of how that's managed. So tonight, I thought it'd be a good idea to have an expert come in and go over the CON process. It's through the Arizona Department of Health Services, and he has successfully navigated this with many, many other communities, this process. So his name is Roy Riles. He's from the James Vincent Group. He's got a PowerPoint presentation for you, and then after which we'll happily entertain any questions you have on this topic. So with that, if there's no questions for me, I would like to invite Mr. Riles up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. My name is Roy Riles. I work with the James Vincent Group, which is a consulting firm that does certificate of necessity as well as financial performance evaluations for cities. Just a little bit of background on Arizona. The provision of ambulance services is totally regulated by the Arizona Department of Health Service. Arizona is unique in that this is actually part of a constitutional amendment in Arizona that was done back in the early to late 1960s to regulate ambulance services after there was a federal deregulation of common carriers, which was historically how ambulances in the state of Arizona and other states were regulated. So there was a public vote, it was a referendum, and it passed like an 85, 90%, and all of that authority was vested with the Arizona Department of Health Services. They regulate all matters as it relates to the provision of ambulance services. That includes what territory you may provide the service in, the rates that you charge, your response times, the qualifications of personnel, equipment, etc. It is total embodiment of regulation of the ambulance service. In order to provide ambulance services in Arizona, you have to have a certificate of necessity. And it's a little bit different than a certificate of need, which was historically what hospitals went through. They call it, for the ambulance component, the certificate of necessity. So with your permission, I'll walk you through a few slides that talks about the process. And then at the end of that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. The first slide we have shows the elements of applying for and getting a certificate of necessity. The first element that I want to discuss is a feasibility study, and it is optional. You're not required to do it. Most public bodies, whether it be a fire district or a city, like to see a feasibility study, and I'll talk briefly about that in a minute. The second component of it is an actual application to the Department of Health Services to get a CON. It is a required component. No matter what happens downstream, we have to do a complete and comprehensive application. Once an application is completed, then there are two possible routes to go, depending on whether there's an objection to a second CON being issued for this area. The first process is called a waiver of hearing process, and that would only occur if there was no objection to the issuance of a second CON. If there is an objection, then we go through a full hearing process, which is performed in front of an administrative law judge, and I'll talk about that in a little more detail. And the last component, again, that's optional, that if you're going to hearing, many cities or fire districts like to do a needs assessment, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So I'm not sure which thing moves me around here. Okay. All right. Okay.
Did you mean to go back one for the 5-year performer?
Yeah, we need to go back one. Let me see if I can do it. There we go. 5-year feasibility study. This is a study that we would do for the city, and what's included in that study is a 5-year pro forma of the financial implications to the city in a P&L format that will identify incremental cost and allocated cost. This is an important component in that the state requires a CON application to be filed according to generally accepted accounting principles, or GAAP. And what it requires us to do when we file that application is quantify how much cash money you're going to be paying to operate the ambulance service, as well as how much revenue you're going to generate by operating the ambulance service after all of the deductions of bad debt and insurance and all of that, and then allocated cost to the ambulance service. So what we have to do when we put together the financial pro forma is allocate many of the existing expenses that you have today, whether you operate an ambulance service or not, in the pro forma. So a part of the cost of operating the council, the city manager's office, all of the infrastructure, that is allocated, or a portion of that is allocated to the ambulance operation so the state can see the entire picture. And when we do this pro forma, we clearly will identify the incremental income, the incremental expenses, which will give you a bottom line, and that would basically be what I consider the cash line to the city, whether it's positive or negative. Then the allocated expenses, which are existing expenses that are here whether you operate an ambulance service or not, and then a bottom line number after that. So it's a very clear presentation of what the financial component is. The feasibility study also does an operational analysis. We look at the geography of the city, the response time performance that would be proposed by the fire department for their ambulance operation, the utilization of ambulances by what we call unit hour utilization, to take into account all of the components. Those things in part drive the expense, but mostly it is to make sure that what the city is proposing to do is operationally feasible. You can meet response times, you can cover the geography, you can handle the call load, you're not overworking the crews, etc. We can do in the feasibility study, and typically do, multiple models. In other words, we could do a model that shows the city doing all of the 911 ambulance transports in the city. The second model might be the city has a joint response capability with AMR continuing to provide service, and then we would model it to see what it looks like if we do that, because the city would be operating fewer ambulances, AMR would be handling the rest of it. So we can do multiple models when we do this modeling, so you can see, well, here's all in, the city doing it all, here's a joint service with the city and AMR jointly providing the service, here's perhaps a third model that quantifies the difference between doing sworn personnel and non-sworn personnel on the ambulances, etc. So we can model it however the city would like us to do that, to produce that feasibility study. The next component is, and typically, and we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end, typically most public bodies like to see this so they know what they're getting into up front. We've got extensive experience, we've done this all over the state, and there's a lot of art as well as expertise that goes into it, because we have to look at the population, the age of the population in terms of what percentage is Medicare, what percentage of the people are on state access, what the collectability rates are, all of the components that go into making up what your revenue is going to be. So there's a lot of expertise that goes into that process to do that analysis. Then if the city makes a decision after seeing the feasibility study, yes, we want to move forward with whichever model that you want to go to, then we would do the application. The application requires extensive information in terms of virtually every component of what you're doing, from radios to territory to road structure to equipment on the ambulances, the financial pro forma in what's called an ambulance revenue and cost report format, which is different than what we would do in the feasibility study, but many of the numbers transfer over to meet the state requirements for the application for a CON. It includes response time performance. What we're proposing to have is response times, the rates that you're proposing to have, the people that you're going to have on the ambulance, or certification and payment levels, territory, and any other operational information that goes into creating a complete application to go to DHS for them to start analyzing it. Once DHS receives the application, they go through two distinct phases. The first stage is called the administrative review process, and they are mandated by law to complete that within 30 days. And what that does is it reviews the application somewhat superficially to determine that all of the statutory requirements are met for the filing of the application. If they have questions, and usually they have one or two, if they have questions, it suspends that 30-day time frame until we respond with a reply and answer their question. But normally we're able to get that completed within 30 to 45 days in a normal application. Once it's administratively complete, we get notified that it's complete, then they do what's called a substantive review. And the substantive review digs a lot deeper, and mostly it concentrates on the financial pro forma. They will test it. They will test what we're proposing in terms of financial performance with similar operations throughout the state. They may make recommendations on rates, and basically it's a very in-depth look at the financial performance that has been proposed. And again, if they have any questions, they will let us know, and then we'll respond to those questions, and during that period of time, the timeline's suspended. Once it is substantively complete, then they transfer it to the Office of Administrative Hearing, which is, we call it OA for short. There are two ways you can go at this point. One is by waiver of hearing, and you're only able to get a waiver of hearing if any incumbent provider, in this case there's only one, AMR, only if AMR does not object to the issuance of a CON to the city. And that's why it's important, I think, in the feasibility study to model it in terms of working with a joint agreement with AMR, that AMR would not object to the city getting a CON, in exchange for which they get to continue providing 911 service through some sort of contractual basis. So the waiver of hearing is the process that I recommend for the town of Florence, because it's not displacing AMR, but it's allowing the town to get a certificate of necessity and jointly operate with them and have that safety net of the city-operated ambulance service in case the ambulances are out of town or on calls and you need additional resources. The process is that once the application's filed, DHS will contact AMR and say, are you going to object? If they say no, then they will give a 30-day written notice to any interested parties, and that includes Access and a few others, and as well as a advertisement, I think it's 2 consecutive cycles of a newspaper in general circulation that would cover this area. If no request for hearing is received, the director may issue the CON without a hearing. I don't know of any case to where the director has had no objection from the incumbent provider that subsequently required a hearing anyway, but at least theoretically it's possible. The other avenue is if there's an objection, a hearing is noticed, then notice of intervention is filed by the objecting party, and it goes to the administrative law judge. The law judge is limited by law, and this is a new law that only came in last year, to 10 business days for the hearing. So it's basically 2 solid weeks of hearing. Prior to that law going in, I've personally been in hearings that have lasted 30 and more days, which obviously are extremely expensive. So it cut the cost down a lot, and now we're required to do the hearings in 2 weeks of hearing time. It's handled like a court proceeding. There's an administrative law judge, you have the applicant that puts on their case in chief about what the need is for an additional certificate holder in Florence, and then their witnesses are put on the stand, sworn in, they testify about the components, and then there's the intervener, gets to cross-examine witnesses, and they get to put on a case, a rebuttal case, as to why they don't believe another CON holder is necessary in the area. Unfortunately, it is a process that is contentious. It is one saying there's a problem, the other saying there's no problem, and you fight it out in court. The hearing officer, after all this is taken into consideration, makes what's called a recommended decision in findings of fact, conclusions of law. So the hearing officer says, I've taken all of this into consideration, and I believe the facts are this. This is what I found when I apply the law to it. And lastly, this is my recommendation that either a CON be granted, or a CON not be granted, or a CON be granted and modified. And the hearing officer then transmits that to the director of DHS, who is the final decision maker. The director may adopt the hearing officer's findings of fact and conclusions of law. She may reject them entirely and create her own, or she may modify them. And we've seen examples of all of those. Recently went through a very long hearing regarding the Timber Mesa Fire District in northeastern Arizona, and the hearing officer recommended that Timber Mesa not get a certificate of necessity. The director overruled that and issued a certificate of necessity. So it basically, all of the authority rests with the director. There's and that final decision, once it's gone through all of those steps, that final decision is appealable to Superior Court, although they're very rarely overturned at Superior Court level because the courts generally defer to the administrative director. The overall time frame from the time of the application to the issuance of the final decision and order is statutorily defined as 450 days. Usually they're done quicker than that, but that's what the overall time frame is in the statute. And there's no penalty if they go beyond that, so if they can, but we normally don't see that. Now I'm going to drop it back to a little bit. The last component that some cities like to do, again, this is an option. It's not required. This would only come into play if there is a contested hearing. And that is a community can decide to do a needs assessment. And what the needs assessment is it's an independent firm that develops a set of questions for the citizens of Florence. And what it does is it assesses what they perceive to be the current state and what they perceive, how they support it. They would compare the incumbent provider to the services provided by the city, and then we would, in that survey, say this is what we are proposing as a go-forward model and seek their input on their support of that. seek their input on what they perceive to be the problems with the existing Model R. Some cities have used it, some cities haven't. I don't make a recommendation one way or the other, but in a contested hearing, it's frequently helpful because the director is required by law to take a needs assessment that's adopted by the council, the local political subdivision, into consideration in making her final determination. Doesn't mean that she necessarily has to follow it, but she is required to take it into consideration prior to making a final decision. So those are another optional thing that is frequently done. And I put a couple of things about considerations for the council. Feasibility study gives the council independent information on the financial and operational implications of operating the ambulance service. We can look at various models and it pro formas it out for the next 5 years. Once you have that information, a fully informed decision can be made by the council on whether this is something that you want to embark upon. A full and complete application that meets the statutes and rules is required regardless of whether you're going to a waiver of hearing or a full hearing. So that's something you have to do in order to get the process starting. If a hearing is required, it's highly recommended that the city be represented by outside counsel that has extensive experience in the CON hearings. I characterized this to an attorney that I worked with many years ago who was very frustrated that the hearing process didn't follow what's known as ZLACT rules, which I'm sure your attorney is very familiar with. And he was very frustrated that it was kind of a loosey-goosey sort of proceeding. And I explained to him, I says, I want you to take a note. I says, a CON hearing has less to do with the practice of law and is more akin to organized mud wrestling. And it really is a process that is not pretty to watch, it's not pretty to go through, but it is the way the process is. And the ultimate decision in a contested case is, what is in the best interest of the citizens? And is there a need for an additional CON provider to meet those needs? That's ultimately what the director will make her final decision on. And at that point, hopefully I haven't confused you. I'll be more than happy to take any questions you have.
Councilmember Hawkins?
Yes, the towns you mentioned that have gone that route, their population is much, much larger than ours. How many towns our size in Arizona operate their own ambulance service?
Goodyear, I believe, just got a CON. Sun City has a CON who is a purely retirement community primarily. I'm not sure what their population is exactly in comparison to Florence.
It's a lot larger.
I'm sorry?
It's a lot larger.
Casa Grande just recently made the decision to apply for a certificate of necessity. They're one of my clients.
Right.
Timber Mesa in the Northeast is probably less population overall than here. Northwest Fire District population.
Mesa's smaller than we are?
I'm sorry?
Did you say Mesa?
No, Timber Mesa.
Where's that?
It's Show Low area, northeast of Show Low.
Oh, okay, up in the White Mountains.
Right.
Yeah.
So Northwest Fire District, which is north of Tucson, population, I haven't looked at the populations of each of these, may be similar, but there are a number of them. They're not all big municipalities. There are a number of them that we've done that are smaller in scope.
Timber Mesa is not a incorporated town.
It's a fire, correct.
It's a fire district.
It's a fire district, that's
Right.
correct.
Right. That's not a town, yeah. Okay, and then, I'd like, on your feasibility study, I'd like to know what the private ambulance companies are paying in wages and benefits. Do they include retirement, personal time off, sick time? And then, so we can compare that to what it would cost us to have city employees, because I know I doubt that they're paying what we pay in wages or benefits. I'd be real surprised.
Everything is included from wages. If they're sworn personnel, it would be public safety retirement program.
Right.
If they're civilian personnel, it would not be that. It would be something else.
It could be nothing.
If it was, we do everything down to uniform allocations, how much is it costing to put uniforms on them, gas, tires, maintenance of the ambulance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All inclusive, everything it takes to operate the ambulance service, including an allocated cost of the city.
Well, that's on the city side. I'm talking about, I'd like the information from AMR of what do they pay? What are their benefits? Do they have retirement? All that, you know.
Well, that,
So, you know, it'll help us on our true cost, you know.
we will look at their cost structure and compare that to what the city is proposing. The only way we get, because that's proprietary information by and large, so to get the detail of that, you'd have to ask AMR. But all ambulance services on an annual basis are required to file an ambulance revenue and cost report. In Pinal County, AMR's CON is county-wide, so their cost and their revenue and so forth is based on the entire county. So we do look at that to see what their cost structure is and how it compares, but it's not specifically addressed in the feasibility study.
Well, I'd sure like to have it in there, so it means we got something to compare to. I mean, you know, I imagine they're operating at a lot less cost than what it will cost us with our benefits and our retirement funds and our wages. But if we don't have something to, well, a feasibility study to me is finding out feasibility, comparing it to what's in operation right now, you know.
That's, most of that is other than aggregate information for all of Pinal County. That is all proprietary information that AMR has, and if I sent them a list of questions about how much you're paying your people in Florence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they wouldn't provide it to me.
Well, I doubt if their employees have a non-disclosure agreement, they're, you know, anyway, okay. That's all I have.
Councilmember Cortez.
So how much is the feasibility study?
I'm sorry?
How much would the town have to pay to have this
A
study done?
feasibility study is $30,000.
Okay. And then that includes, once we do the feasibility study, if we then decided to hand in an application, is that an additional fee, or does the $30,000 cover the whole picture?
No, the $30,000 is a feasibility study. If a feasibility study is done and then we subsequently do the application is $30,000. If you decide not to do a feasibility study and go straight to an application, which you can do, then the application is $40,000. And the reason it's less expensive if we do the feasibility study first is a good deal of the information that we develop in the feasibility study will transfer over to the application. Not all of it, it's about 20% of it will transfer directly over to the application. So our time involved in doing the application is considerably less if we've already done a feasibility study. If we haven't done the feasibility study, obviously that's all groundwork that has to be done for the application.
Okay, and then once we get into the application, if there's questions or anything that get kicked back in that time, that 30 days or the 420 days, all get put on hold, are they contacting you or are they contacting outside legal?
Well, at this point, we
Does it
wouldn't have
depend?
outside legal.
Okay.
In the hearing process or in the application process, I would not recommend retaining the attorney until you know whether we're actually going to go to a hearing or not. And any questions that arise as a result of either the administrative review or the substantive review. Any work that's done by us is included in the application fees. So that doesn't cost you anything extra.
And then, I'm sorry, I think I missed the part where you said what the percentage of these applicants are that don't go to a hearing.
I'm sorry, I have a hearing.
That's okay. Out of the, what's the percentage of applicants that don't have to go to a hearing?
Probably 25% of the ones I've done over the last 8 to 10 years.
Don't go to hearing, the
Don't
rest
go to hearing,
typically go.
yeah.
So 75% have a hearing and need to hire outside counsel that's experienced in this type of hearing process.
Correct.
Okay.
And all of that hinges on the relationship the fire department has and the city has with AMR and what type of potential negotiated agreement can be reached for the joint service.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Hughes, and then you. I'm going in order that people motioned me.
Is the rate regulated?
They are.
Okay, and so, and that's, can it be changed more than one time a year?
There is an what we call an automatic or a price deflator increase that occurs each year that you can apply for, and it's automatic if you apply for it. It's just a one-page application. And what it is based on are 2 federal market indices. One's a medical practice index, and a transportation index from the feds is added together, divided by 2, and that percentage is automatically given to any CON holder that applies for it. That you can do each year. You cannot apply for any type of increase more than once every 6 months. If the city had a CON and it found that its operational costs were greater than expected for whatever reason, you do have the option, if you haven't filed for a rate increase in the previous 6 months, of applying for what's called a general rate increase. And that, again, you have to do a financial pro forma, and you have to go before the department and say, here's what, this is the rate that we want to have, this is the increase that we want to have, and here's our justification for that increase. And as long as it's known, predicted, and provable, they normally agree to it. And the most common reason I've seen that occur throughout the state is generally if you keep up with the price deflators, you maintain status quo. But a couple occasions I remember where a union contract was renegotiated with significant increases for personnel. Those weren't foreseen in the rates, so they went in and applied for a higher rate to cover that, and in fact, it was granted. So there is an opportunity to increase rates beyond what's called a price deflator.
Also, what is the collectability rate?
I can't tell you right off the top of my head because there are 3 or 4 things that go into that.
Okay.
Number 1 is the Medicare reimbursement.
Okay.
All of your Medicare patients, the ambulance provider must accept assignment to get paid by Medicare. Medicare has a fixed rate that they pay that's considerably lower than what we call the street rate or the public rate is. And then there is a 20% copay that's either responsibility of the individual or supplemental insurance that they may have for Medicare. That is considered a contractual adjustment. So as an example, here I think the rates are probably in the neighborhood of, base rate of in the neighborhood of $1,100, $1,200 in that area. Medicare will pay $867, period. They'll pay 80% of that, and the remaining 20% is a personal requirement to pay, or supplemental if they have like AARP or whatever as a supplemental policy. That's considered a contractual adjustment. The second contractual adjustment, and by the way, in most communities, and I would suspect it's probably going to be true in this community, Medicare is your number 1 payer. Okay. The second payer typically is Access, which is Arizona's version of Medicaid. They pay 67.7% of the state-approved rate. So as your state rate goes up, your street rate goes up, their reimbursement goes up, but it doesn't occur simultaneously. There's a waiting period until their rate goes up. That's the second contractual adjustment. You don't have the opportunity to go after the patient for any residuals. The third is private insurance and or private pay. And that are people that are on access, people that aren't Medicare, and they have insurance, their insurance is billed, and then the any residuals, or if there is no insurance, the patient themselves are billed. If it gets down to that level where the patient is actually billed, the collectability is pretty slim, to be honest with you.
Is that like 0%?
Get
away with it?
It varies so much by community to community, but when you get down to private pay, it's typically around the 50% level. So that's why it's so important to really look at all of those things specific to Florence to see, you know, in my world, cash is king. How much money are we spending versus how much money does it cost, or how much money are we getting in revenue? That's really what I think you as council's interested in. You're not really concerned about how we allocate part of the city manager or the city attorney. You're really concerned about, if we spend this much, are we going to get that much, at least that much back in revenue, in cash?
Councilmember Wall?
Contemplating this brought up a full page of questions on my part, some of which you've answered already. Others came up as you were talking. Why wouldn't the needs assessment be done at the same time or before the feasibility study?
Well, two answers to that. One is some people do that. Some cities I've worked with did the needs assessment very early on to see what community perception is on a more detailed basis. I realized that you did some sort of community survey that said they were supportive, but this really puts a little more granularity to that process. Some do, in fact, do those before they file for a CON. Others wait to see if they're actually going to have a hearing, because it's not inexpensive to do a needs assessment. They run between, depending on how extensive, they run between $25,000 and $35,000. Probably the average is around 28. They may not want to make that expense unless they know they're going to hearing. And then they do the needs assessment, and if it's helpful, then the director has to take it into consideration. If it's not helpful, we wouldn't give it to the director to take into consideration. Although the opposition might, because it's a public record.
Thank you. Another question I had is how are other towns that have their ambulance service handling the insurance billing? Are they hiring outside services for that or doing it in-house?
Pretty much everyone, with a couple of rare exceptions, hire outside billing and collection firms to do that. And the reason for that is the cities, even big cities, very rarely have in-house the expertise that it takes to navigate the myriad of regulations of Medicare, access, insurance companies. And as soon as you figure out how to do that, they'll change the process. So it's an ongoing process. They have a vested interest not to pay, frankly. And I'm not always politically correct, but that's the truth. So it takes a lot of expertise to navigate that. There are several really good firms, and they do it, and we will budget for that and show that in the pro forma, and they do it as a percentage of revenue collected. So they have a vested interest to collect the revenue, because the more revenue they collect for the city, the more obviously money they're making. And that's typically the arrangement versus virtually everyone, with one or two exceptions, in the state uses in terms of political bodies.
Okay, thank you.
Are we, once, let's say we do this and we get our certificate and we have an ambulance service, are we locked in? I mean, do we have to, let's say down the road, we find out we're losing money and the citizens are not happy with it, you know, if they have to pick up the slack to support it, are we locked in? Or could like a water company, you know, once they, or anybody that furnishes water, they're obligated from then on to
You're
furnish water. Are we going to be obligated to furnish ambulance service?
You're obligated through the, from a purely legal standpoint, you're obligated through the term of the certificate of necessity, which is 3 years, and then it has to be renewed. So theoretically, I don't know if anyone's ever done this, but theoretically, at the end of that 3-year period, you could notify the department, we don't intend to renew our certificate of necessity, in which case your certificate would expire at the end of that period. Keep in mind the fact, if Florence gets a CON, it is not displacing AMR because they still will have a CON. It'll be duplicative CONs. There'll be 2 CONs for the area. And frankly, if some point in the future you decided that, well, we're not going to do this anymore, there'll be more than enough private firms that would want to step in and serve the city.
Okay. Okay, so we do this, and this wouldn't be for you, I guess it'd be for staff. If we decided at the end of that 3 years, if we decided that we were losing money, it's not worth it, it's better just to let the private company do it, then our employees that we've hired, how are we going to, I mean, how are we going to handle that? Are we going to lay them off? We've never had any big layoffs in Florence, ever. So I'm just, you know, it'd be a shame to hire a bunch of people and then find out later that it's not working out. So I don't know who would answer that.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hawkins, that would be a decision that we'd have to make at that time. I'm not sure we have an answer to that question right now. It would
Well,
depend
it's
upon
something-
budget and,
Something to think about
Yeah.
before we bite a big deal like this off, you know. That's a hell of an obligation.
One of the options that I mentioned before is if at the end of that 3-year period you find that you're losing money, then you have the option of going in and applying for a rate increase to get your rates up that would generate a little more revenue for the city. I can tell you, and I've done 30+ CON matters in the state, and no one, including fire districts, fire departments, private providers, none of them have at this point decided that they didn't want to do it anymore and let their certificate expire. So for whatever reason, they're all happy with what they're doing.
I'm just trying to plan ahead here, you know. I mean, I want all the options. I want to know all the facts we can get, you know.
Extremely prudent.
Anyway. Oh, and on that survey, I don't remember, unless somebody can refresh my memory, you say it was 60% of the citizens in Florence thought that we should have an ambulance service ourselves. Was that because they're not, was the question in there, were they not satisfied with their service right now? Because I haven't heard any complaints from any citizens about the ambulance service. So, you know, just saying, oh yeah, it'd be great to have one, but not really knowing what it's going to cost the town, it's not, it's, you know, it's not a great survey question without knowing what was their reasoning behind it, you know.
Madam Mayor,
Vote.
Councilmember Hawkins, Ben is looking that up at this time, and it looks like he's going to provide me with an answer.
Great.
Thank you, Councilmember Hawkins. The question that was on the citizen survey read, a private company currently provides ambulance service to residents in Florence. Would you support the Florence Fire Department providing this service and collecting a user fee which may be paid by insurance? 59.8% said support, 19.8% opposed, and 20% said they did not know.
Yeah, but that was without knowing if they were dissatisfied. It didn't ask, are they dissatisfied with what's going on? They just asked, do you want the fire department to have ambulance service?
That's correct. And
Well,
the
you
reason
know.
we asked this question in our 2019 survey was the same question was worded the same way in the 2014 survey.
Right, well, I think if we do another one, we need to ask, have you had any problems with what's happening right now? You know, this might not even be an issue if the people are asked the right question and knows, you know, what it might actually cost them. You know, just asking them, well, do you think having ambulance service with your insurance, is that okay? Well, not everybody has insurance, and mostly in Florence, we have a large community of access people and a large, super large community of Medicare. So, you know, those are things we need to look at.
Councilmember Cortez.
So when you've done this, have you found that the rate increases when they go from the private to the town or the city facilitating the ambulance service? So
No.
say it's 1,200, do you typically see it increases, stays the same, or maybe goes down a little?
It usually is the same. There's one major, or there was one community within the last 3 years that actually applied for a rate that was slightly less than the incumbent provider. In most instances, you're really not competing on rate at a hearing, you're competing on service. In most instances, if there is an existing CON holder, the rates that we would apply for would be the same as the current CON holder. There's a presumption, at least they're making money doing that, or they would ask for higher rates. So typically that's the way we do the application. Although we can propose higher rates going in, or we can propose lower rates going in, DHS will evaluate it and they will recommend rates, and usually they're within a couple of dollars of what we have proposed.
Yeah, the reason why I ask that is because I'm sure, for example, ARM, they're not just here in Florence, they're all over. So they're able to utilize the same staff to help them do the back housekeeping part of it, their administrators and all that. So their expense might be less than what our expense would be. So what I'm trying to figure out is, would we have to raise the rate in order to stay at the same profit level that they're at? Because we wouldn't have that same, you know, we'd be like small business versus big business. And so that's what I'm trying to figure out.
Well, it's a two-edged sword when you work for a big company. Having done that for 20-some years in the ambulance industry myself, they have allocated costs too that are dropped down to the operating entities. So it all depends on what their allocated costs are, how they, from their corporate parent, how they allocate down attorney's fees, all of the other insurances and all of that stuff. Theoretically, it could be less than the cities. In some instances, it's been my experience that it's more, but that's part of the process of the feasibility study, which is to look at what your real expenses are versus your real revenue to make that decision.
All right, I have a few questions, but I want to go last. Does anybody else have any questions?
I do.
Vice Mayor?
Well, part of my concern is if we have two CONs, which one answers the call?
Well, it can be set up in a number of ways. It's like most of these questions, it depends. If we use what's referred to as the Green Valley model, the agreement there is that Green Valley fields, I believe, 2 ambulances 24 hours a day, and I may have the number slightly off. AMR likewise fields 2 ambulances 24 hours a day. The ambulances have vehicle locating devices in them, and the dispatch agency dispatches the closest available appropriate unit, regardless of whether it's a town unit or an AMR unit. That's typically the way it works. It gets the closest ambulance there the fastest, regardless of whether it's operated by the town or someone else. That's the usual model. I have seen models, I don't recommend them, but I have seen models where they took a territory and drew a line and said, okay, city's going to be responsible from this line to the left, and AMR would be responsible from this line to the right. It has simplicity to it, but ambulances don't always stay in their station. As they move around the city, they may be a block away from a call, and if it's the other guy's territory, then you're waiting longer for an ambulance. So the model that I would recommend highly is that it be done on a closest available appropriate unit basis for dispatching. And that requires us to do, when we do the modeling, that requires us to work very closely with the chief and his staff to develop the call load location information for us to make some pretty accurate scientific guesses as to what the volume is going to be for the relative providers. If you're providing 1 ambulance and they're providing 2, it's going to be a different model than if you're providing 2 and they're providing 1, et cetera. So we would take that into consideration in the modeling so you could see what it looks like financially from that perspective.
I can see a problem with that because if our units are stationed at our fire stations, AMR can take their unit and park it right in the middle of Sun City.
Well, like I say, you start off at a sub-operation station, but unlike fire trucks, normally you'll have a fire truck at a station, and it gets a call, and it goes from that call, or gets from that station to that call, and then it goes back to its station. So it moves in a fairly linear fashion. Ambulances are different. You get a call for the ambulance, it may start at the station, and then it goes to the call, and if the patient's transported, then the patient's transported to a facility, and it might be the local facility, it could be Casa Grande, it's possible it could go to Chandler if it was a trauma patient, and then that ambulance then comes back. Well, 30% of its time may not be in the station. It's somewhere in that travel zone, and then if a call kicks out that's very close to it and it's available, you would want that ambulance to go to it, not somebody that's on the other side of town. So that's why we refer to it as the closest available appropriate unit mode of dispatch. It requires the ambulances to have what's called an AVL, which is an automatic vehicle locator in it. Most ambulance services provide that, and that way the dispatch agency, once the call comes in, it can immediately populate and said, this ambulance is appropriate, it's closest, and that's the one we're going to send on it.
Thank you.
Councilmember Larson.
I just wanted to comment that as far as I'm concerned, AMR, we've had a good partnership with them up to this point, and they've been doing business in our town for a while now. I feel like there's some confidence there. I think that from the citizen survey, what my understanding looking at it from a big picture is that they really trust our fire and police services, and I think that that's where they're wanting to expand on that. But going back to AMR, they wouldn't be here if there wasn't business to be had. If there wasn't money to be made. So to me, there is something more maybe we need to look into. A lot of my questions really can't be answered unless we did the feasibility study. I'd like to see those firm numbers and really analyze whether it's financially feasible for us to perform something like this. And I would like to make sure, like you said, that we have a continued working relationship with AMR. I do like that, the closest model, like like you're talking about with the AVL locators. So to me, if we're going to pursue this, we have to do the feasibility study, in my opinion. if we decide to continue on.
Okay, so my comments, and I appreciate everybody's insightful questions and comments. We had a lot of good discussion here tonight. So from my understanding and talking with other communities, in reality, there's no cost lost. And I took some notes as everybody was talking, so I'm just going to read them if that's okay with you. There's no cost lost, and as a matter of fact, as most of the monies that are expended, there are already costs that are associated within our town's general fund in regards to the building, the administration. From what I understand, years ago, we received a grant for one ambulance. I also believe there's other grants out there, the SAFER grant. There's grants with agencies around us in regards to helping us with additional ambulances. The SAFER grant's something that would help pay for the staffing for up to 3 years in this. Do you include that information in the report as well?
We really don't go into the source of funding for the city. If the city chooses to do, or in the is successful in getting a SAFER grant, that's not something that we're able to quantify. It is, if there is funding from the city, we quantify how much that is. Where you get the money from is up to you, basically.
Perfect. You know, I see a lot of benefits in being able to simultaneously provide services between AMR and our community. It would enhance the services that we are providing to our citizens. I agree with other council members that have stated looking at that feasibility study would be our first step in really having those hard numbers right in front of us to make that informed decision. So after hearing from everybody this evening, a lot of the questions I had were already communicated as well. I would like to see our staff work with you in regards to moving forward with a feasibility study. I know that this is not something that's a voted item that's agendized for action this evening. However, it is something that would be under the manager's purview for costs if we gave him the direction.
Madam Mayor, members of council, at $30,000, obviously that's above my level that I can approve. So it'll have to come back as a future agenda item. In addition, we'll get with the finance department and make some recommendations of where those funds would come from, because this is not something that we've budgeted.
Okay, I appreciate that. You know, I've spent a lot of time over the last 2 years talking with a lot of other municipalities, and I understand you've also guided them in their endeavors of pursuing this. And the wealth of knowledge and expertise you have in your field will definitely serve our community well, should we go down that road.
Thank you. And kind of as a closing, I always encourage, unless there are significant failures of the incumbent provider, to try to work a deal out with them to where both of you can provide services. It's the best level of coverage for the community, and everybody is happy. And that's, you know, that's always, to me, the best outcome. If it goes to a full-blown hearing, then it gets contentious, and there are the winners and losers, and it's just better for the city and much more expeditious and much less expensive to do it that way. So I'm glad to hear that the people seem to be satisfied with AMR, and I would encourage the city to work closely with them to see if a stipulation can be worked out on what a joint service model looks like, and the city able to get a CON in case there are issues in the future.
Thank you very much, sir, for your time this evening. And I also want to acknowledge our fire personnel as well as AMR in the audience this evening. Thank you both for coming out tonight.
Thank you.
I have one more,
Oh, I apologize.
please.
Councilmember Hawkins.
No, the way, like I say, if we do this feasibility study, that yeah, we definitely, if we go that route. But I would like the town to maybe do, I don't know what it will cost us, but to ask the community, the citizens that have used our ambulance service or AMR, specifically what problems have they had? if we don't really, the way I'm looking at this, like I said, I haven't heard anybody complaining about our ambulance service. So to me, if it's not a problem, it's why are we doing it? I mean, because it is going to cost, I can't imagine it not costing us more money to do this. Now, sure, grants, I've heard that twice today, but grants, they come and go. Can't operate depending on grants. You've got to, because it's like this is what the state's done to all the municipalities the last few sessions. They keep taking our money away from us, and who knows when it'll stop. So, like I say, I don't see if there's a problem, but if somebody can show me there's a problem, then, hey, I'm all for it. But I haven't really heard of anybody complain. And that's why I'm wondering why we're even doing this. But, I'm open to it if I'm a believer in the majority rules. So, but I would like to know that, if there are specific problems with what's going on now. If there's not, I don't know why we're trying to fix something that's not broken.
And just to tie in with your comment about grants, it isn't always about grants that are available or that aren't available. The structure that's put in place from conversations that I've had with other communities that have done this, the offset that you save in your general fund, I don't want to use the word equals out. You really end up being able to bring more to the table and better services for your citizens that you represent with less impact to your general fund. And that's what the feasibility study, I believe, will show our community. Did I sum that up correctly? Okay.
Works for me. The only comment I have on that is the city could certainly do a questionnaire, a sampling of the city in terms of more specifically if there have been problems with their perception, have they ever used an ambulance service, what were their feelings about it. That's not part of the feasibility study. That would be part of the needs assessment. The needs assessment does gauge the citizens' perceptions about the incumbent ambulance service provider, and it does ask questions, have you used the provider before, and then you rate a satisfaction level with that, and it does the same thing with the fire department. So you get a general feel of how people perceive their ambulance service and fire department overall, and then it is specific to, have you used their services in the past, and what are your perceptions? Because frequently those differ a little bit. And then the third component of it is, this is what the city is proposing. What are your perceptions about this proposal? So that is not part of the feasibility study. That's part of the needs assessment, and an independent polling firm actually does. I actually work with the developers to get not neutral questions. They're not push-pull questions, because we all know that you can poll and get any answer you want based on the way you ask the question. We pose very neutral questions, try to get unfiltered feedback, and a polling is done of a statistically significant number of people in the city, and we do that by zip code to get that needs assessment done. But it doesn't say, have you had problems? It says, what's your level of satisfaction with the fire department, with AMR, and then what's your perception about it go forward with this model?
All right. Well, thank you very much, sir.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Chief Strayer, do you have any closing words?
No, I just thank you for the opportunity to let us share the. I guess I would say, just as the fire chief, I do believe that There's a reason why all these communities are pursuing this, and there is value in controlling your destiny. And we're really talking about a service delivery and adding capacity into the system. We're not displacing anyone. And being in a fast-growing area, especially on the major incidents, having that added capacity can save lives. So I would like that to be considered as we look at this issue. That's all I have.
Thank you very much. That closes our work session on Certificate of Need for Ambulance Service. At this time, we will go into a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
At this time, we have our call to the public. I do not have any forms. However, is there anybody in the public that would like to speak at this time? And closing call to the public. Going into item 7A, this is our public hearing. This is our public hearing and possible adoption of a text amendment to the sign regulations of the Development Code with the amendment to include the language as recommended by the Ad Hoc Sign Committee. Ordinance number 667-19, an ordinance of the Town of Florence, Pinal County, Arizona, amending the Town of Florence Code of Ordinances, Title 15, Land Usage, Chapter 150, Development Code, Section 150.31, Definitions, and repealing and replacing Part 3, Sign Regulations, Sections 150.92 to 150.130. This is also case number PZ 18-33 ordinance. Mr. Larry Harmer. This is also our second reading.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. As you're well aware, this has gone through a lengthy process, but interestingly enough, for a sign code, it's as fast as any I've seen. Sign codes are probably the most controversial and detail-oriented and examined with a fine-tooth comb section of any development code. So I think that being the case, that the town has gone the extra mile in this particular case to review, leave it open for public comment, and all of the things that would normally go with that. The list of public meetings and the tracking of how this all occurred is in your staff report. I'd like to note specifically the ad hoc committee, which met in July, August, and September, examining off-site or off-premise signage opportunities. I thought was a pretty comprehensive series of discussions. It was represented by 3 members of the council appointed by the mayor, including herself, as well as 4 members of our business community. A little side note to some of the discussions that happened at the ad hoc committee is centered on murals and kiosk and wayfinding signage, and deciding that would be handled as separate items. But I just wanted to update you quickly. We're working, the community development is working with community services on the mural program, and we actually have a meeting later this week to address that. Also, we're working hopefully in cooperation with Pinal County on a partnership for kiosk and wayfinding signage, and we've initiated that discussion also. So those will be moving forward. You have in your packet the code as it was presented at the first public hearing, as well as at the end, the recommendations that came by consensus out of the ad hoc committee. So for clarity, I would suggest, should you move to adopt the code tonight, that you include a statement that the code revision does include the recommendations from the ad hoc sign committee, and they would be incorporated appropriately into the code. I'll be happy to answer any general questions you might have, and we do have our consultant here for any detailed or specific technical questions you might have.
Are there any questions from council regarding this? Councilmember Larson.
So I know during the committee meetings that we talked extensively about bandit signs.
Right.
I do not see that in here. Can you remind me exactly what happened with that, or can you?
It's still in. It's in there. If you look at
See it.
The recommendations that came from the ad hoc sign committee,
be.
which is the back of your packet in red, there was discussion about bandit signs as far as how they were defined, and that there would be, I'm looking for the exact place, but for the off-premise sign, it could be either an A-frame or a bandit sign. Either one would be allowed.
There was one little item there. All right, found it.
Okay,
I don't know how I missed that. I apologize. Thank you.
no problem.
While everybody's looking, go ahead.
I may have misunderstood what we were looking at in terms of the existing code. I thought that what was submitted by the ad hoc committee would have been incorporated into the document that we received, but did I understand you correctly to say that everything in the ad hoc committee document would be incorporated?
Right, since it hadn't been a full direction of the council at this point, we did not incorporate it in the draft. We left the draft as you've seen it previously.
Okay.
And then that's why it's attached separately, and we'd like, just like I said, for clarification, just to add it to the motion.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
I want to thank the ad hoc committee and staff and our consultant. This was a very extensive process that we have gone through to make sure that we are doing the very best for the businesses and the community. I also like that you brought the fact of the matter regarding the murals and how you're working on that and you're updating us on that, so thank you.
Well, it was going to be a question, so might as well address it up front.
All right, if there's no further questions, with that, can I have the motion with the add-end that Mr. Harmer proposed?
You still have to hold the public hearing.
Oh, you're correct. Public hearing is open. Is there any questions, comments at this time? Closing public hearing. Thank you. And with that, we need a motion.
Make a motion, we adopt ordinance number 667-19, an ordinance of the town of Florence, amending the town of Florence Code of Ordinances Title 5, is that 5? I'm not very good at Roman numerals. Land Usage Chapter 150, Development Code, Section 150.031, Definitions, and repealing and replacing Part 3 Sign Regulations, Section 150.092 to 150.130, Case PZ 18-33 Ordinance.
I second.
Was
With-
that intended to include the ad hoc committee recommendations?
With the addition of the ad hoc.
Well, I thought it was in there. Okay, but how would you want me to,
Just add with the addition.
oh, okay. By adding the ad hoc sign committee,
I'm in my second. I second.
or include the language as recommended by the ad hoc sign committee, I'm sorry.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign, and the motion carries.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. This will go into effect in 30 days.
Thank you very much. Item 8 is our consent agenda. Before I read it, I am just going to remove items A and B. So our consent agenda, all items on the consent agenda will be handled by a single vote as part of the consent agenda unless a council member or member of the public objects at the time the agenda item is called. Item C is approval of the purchase of 8 Panasonic mobile data computers with keyboards in 8 docking stations from Code 3 Technologies in an amount not to exceed $38,635.61. Item D is authorization to dispose of vehicles and equipment that are no longer needed and have outlived their useful life. Item E is to award a contract to Franklin Stripping Incorporated to update existing roadway striping for CIP T-69 pavement preservation in an amount not to exceed $87,408.74. Item F is approval of the October 7th and October 21st, 2019 Town Council meeting minutes. Item G is to receive and file the following board and commission minutes. First, September 25th, 2019, the Historic District Advisory Commission meeting minutes. Second, October 3rd and October 17th, 2019, Planning and Zoning meeting minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, that is your consent agenda. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda, removing items A and B at this time?
So moved.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item A, I noticed that we have some representatives with us in the audience as well this evening. This was come on up, Mr. Hughes, absolutely. This is an approval of services agreements with the Florence Music Festival LLC for 2020 Florence Music Festival in an amount not to exceed $24,500. Mr. Hughes, we're really excited as a whole to hear from you, so we wanted to give you an opportunity to share with the community as well as us the details.
Mayor Walter, Vice Mayor Anderson, council members. This is exciting because this is a partnership that we've been looking for since we started talking about music festivals and art festivals back in the spring when the council expressed an interest in kind of expanding our special events. Knowing that we don't necessarily have the expertise or the staff time to do all these things, we were seeking a partner for both these events. And we issued an RFP, 2 separate RFPs for this. The first time we sent it out, we didn't get a response from either one. But we did get some feedback, so we were able to tweak those RFPs, and then we reissued those, and we received one response for each. Fortunately, both those responses were from local entities, and one was the Florence Music Festival LLC, who was already kind of on their way to prepare a 2-day music festival. And as you saw in the documents that were presented to you, they've got an excellent scope of work. They're well on their way. They're just seeking some guidance and some financial support, and I think that's a great thing because it achieves the goal of adding a music festival and also a good partnership. So again, we don't have to do all the work, and we're aiding them. The art festival, same thing. Florence Chamber of Commerce responded to that. We helped them a little bit with the scope of work as we work through this, and I think they're going to be a good partner for that. In fact, a couple weeks ago, Allie and I had visited the Fountain Hills Chamber of Commerce's big art festival. And 30 years ago, they started very small, just like this one is. So there's kind of an idea of what it could grow to, and that was through their chamber too. So I think there's an opportunity here for us to partner and again, get exactly what we're hoping for as far as adding 2 new events that will bring people to town, help boost our economy a little bit with tourism, and also give our community members a couple of great events to stay here for. So with that, we recommend, and again, they're both within budget. We did budget about $75,000 for 3 new events, and that was to be divided almost evenly. So the recommendation here is $24,500 for each of those events, and again, within budget. So we recommend approval.
Excellent. No, this is fabulous, and I wanted to separately, would Florence Music Festival like to come up and say anything at this time? We're really excited. We want to celebrate all of the amazing things that are happening in Florence, and I want to tell you, thank you so much for stepping up and carrying this forward.
Well, thank you. I'm Keith Ray, this is Bill Foster, and we thought of this plan back in February, March. We actually had it going before the RFPs ever came about, so we were going to do it regardless. And now with the town stepping in and helping out is really going to ensure its success for many years to come. That's our anticipation. Yep.
Excellent. Do you have anything to say as well?
No, just excited to be a part of it and hope we have a very successful first year here so that we can continue to carry it on.
Well, you guys already bring fabulous music to the community. We're really looking forward to the festival as well.
Good. So we think it's going to be great. It's going to be like a lot of food vendors, food trucks, just a lot of, hopefully a lot of commotion going on, good commotion.
Tourism, bringing people into town.
Yeah, it should be fun. And that's all we're doing. It's going to be a fun time, period.
Yep.
For kids, adults, retirees, everyone.
Councilmember Cortez, you had a question?
Kind of a question and a statement. So some of the feedback from other events that have happened in downtown Main Street or at the park is that some of our businesses feel like they've been left out or that they haven't been consulted with, you know, food put right next to a restaurant. So I just want to urge you to make sure that you communicate with our businesses.
Which we have, yep,
Extensively.
yep.
And so that way, everybody feels like they've had a say in it, especially since we're awarding this money. Now we're awarding money that our taxpayers have put in. So they're now a stakeholder in this event. They're no longer just the public. So I just want to make sure that we're thinking of everybody. I know that there's camping and things like that. So just the impact, you know, that's going to happen by this event. I'm excited for it,
Yeah.
but I'm always that person in the background going, okay, this is great, but what if? So that's me.
Right.
So I just want to make sure that, yeah, you're going to bring in a bunch of food vendors and other vendors. Let's just really make sure that people see our local people and how great we are and all the things that we have to offer. So when those vendors aren't here, they still want to come back and go to those restaurants or go to those shops and things like that. Go to your barber shop or whatever. You know, that's what I want to make sure is that we really highlight Florence, the music, and everything like that. So that's my comment.
Which is
Absolutely.
which is really what I've been pushing on different Facebook pages, the historic district, and talking to other business owners. You know, we'll give them a vendor booth for as low as $50. You know, as long as they're a chamber member, which is really, really reasonable for 2 days with the amount of people we're hoping for. But I will be honest, more outside vendors have taken advantage of it than local. So that's something I want to reach out to them again and just say, hey, it's yours too. Come on in. You know, we're not doing this alone.
Vice Mayor, sorry, I stumbled in the
Yeah.
words.
I guess it's for Brian, for both of these. What are the dates of these events?
March 14th, 15th for the music festival, and we're still working out, trying to find a date for the art festival that doesn't conflict with some other things. So it's moved around a couple times, but we'll finalize that with the, hopefully the approval of the contract.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Keith.
Thanks,
Bill.
John.
How much of the area will be in fencing?
How much of the area will be in fence?
Yes, how much will be in fenced? I know that there's
Currently, the entire festival where the soccer field resides right now will be in fencing,
okay,
security fencing.
okay, thanks.
All right. Well, I'm going to have you gentlemen have a seat for a moment while I call up Mr. Beatty with the chamber and Ms. Gramazio as well, if you want to say a few words about the art festival. Thank you, gentlemen, because then we'll approve them all at once. We'll vote on them all at once.
Madam Mayor,
I don't want to violate anything.
Vice Mayor and council members, my name is Roger Beatty. I'm with the Florence Chamber of Commerce, and we are proud to say that we responded to that RFP as it fits our strategic plan quite a bit, bringing business and publicity to the town. It is something that fits right in our wheelhouse, and we're looking forward to bringing together a great festival that will continue on in many years. In my past experiences, I've set up trade shows and other similar things, so this is kind of in my wheelhouse. So I'm looking forward to a successful first event and an successful second, third, and fourth event.
Excellent. Are there any questions regarding the art festival?
I don't have any question, but I know we've been talking about this for years. Now, if Brian laughs the second I turn on the mic. We've been talking about doing an art festival for years and years, so I am so glad that this is finally possibly coming to fruition. So
I think this fits right together with what the Florence Chamber is doing this year for 2020, and we're looking forward to a very successful event. And to answer Councilmember Cordes, we are also working with local businesses already. Already talked to Rail 3. I've already talked to a number of the businesses that will be participating, whether they're putting something on the sidewalk or getting a booth on their own to be in the street, but they are all looking forward to it already. As part of our third Thursday's meetings, I've already discussed and already talked about it coming.
You'll close the street down?
We're planning on closing most of Main Street, yes. Depending on how many vendors and stuff, we will be closing it at least from Ruggles until, I don't know, probably not all the way to 11th, but pretty much as we can to make it look and feel comfortable for all the people that will be coming.
Have we thought about, maybe not on the first one, but whatever, having it in conjunction with the car show?
Councilmember Hawkins, my car show is way too busy to bring anything else in. I don't know if you've been to the last one, but we
Sure,
filled
I've
up the
been to all.
street and you can't walk through it.
No, I know.
We
I've
expect,
been-
but we'll bring vendors to the car show separately, but to bring something like this, we expect more people to be coming to this than the car show. So
Okay.
putting the two together, I don't think Florence is big enough right now. I don't think Fountain Hills is big enough right now.
Yeah, well, Casa Grande's been very successful at it for quite a few years.
I have more cars than Casa Grande.
Pardon me?
I have more cars and people coming than Casa Grande.
I think we had 200 on the way last year that.
Yeah, my
ended
car
up-
show is much bigger than the car show in Casa Grande. The car show at the Chamber puts on is the largest in Pinal County.
Mhm.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
Yes, sir.
Because that one's big over there too, but it gives people options besides just the art end of it. And then one other question, is this gonna be a juried art festival or a non-juried?
The plan currently is to be juried.
Well, I would think on your first go-around, you'd want, unless you're getting a whole bunch of applications, you know.
Well, it could change, but part of the RFP was to have the ZAP app or website, which lends itself to juried art shows. So a lot of the people that we hope that will be submitting for display and participation will be those that are normal, that are used to juried.
Okay, well, the reason I'm asking is because I know when Mill Avenue, when we started we called it the Hayden's Ferry Arts and Crafts Festival back then, I helped get that going with some of my other buddies up there that own businesses on Mill Avenue. And it started very small. And of course, we weren't juried. The reason they started jurying was because it got so big that they had to jury it because you couldn't, there just isn't enough room for all artists to show up. But to start off with, it was a non-juried. But I have no problem going with juried as long as you have enough people that'll apply, artists that will apply.
We have a pretty good start right now. We haven't confirmed the date because of other art shows in the
Right.
East Valley.
Right.
So we're going to nail that down, but we hope to pick a weekend that is available. And between drawing from Tucson, Catalina, Phoenix, and obviously the East Valley, we hope that we're in a pretty good position to draw people from, even Gila County. We're in a great position, kind of a center area, to make a pretty special show.
Right, well, I know Tucson, the Fourth Avenue Art Festival, they have that twice a year. And also the same with the Mill Avenue. It's twice a year, so,
Absolutely. I grew up going to the Fourth Avenue Street Fair. Well familiar with it.
yeah, well, I am too.
Hope to emulate it quite a bit.
Yeah, okay.
Vice Mayor, you had something as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, Roger, how do you solicit people to an art show, and what are the limitations? Or are there any restrictions?
Right now, the first thing we're using is that ZAP website, which is a specialized website in, I'm not sure if it's Arizona or nationwide, but it does solicit artists that look for events like this. It does all the work for you. The artists submit their work to this. It judges it and gives us recommendations on who to invite. So that's the beginning part. I also attended the Fountain Hills event, also have connections to the Chamber in Tucson, which has given me the vendor list of Fourth Avenue Street Fair and the Fountain Hills. So I'll be inviting all of those people also.
Great, thank you.
Excellent. If there's no further questions or comments, I'd like to thank you both for being here.
Thank you. Can I add something to the music festival? Because the chamber's handling, and I don't mean to talk out of line here, but the chamber is handling the vendors, and we have had some questions on local businesses on participating in it. I know that there have been 2 or 3 inquiries. They're deciding on whether or not they have the capability of participating out there on the field of local businesses. So they are taking that into account. So thank you, Council, for.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. With that, I need a recommended motion for item A, or item A and B, if somebody is so inclined.
I motion that we approve consent agenda items A and B.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Congratulations to all of you. Exactly what Councilmember Hughes just said. Thank you. Item 9 is unfinished business. This is ordinance number 684-19. This is discussion, approval, disapproval of an ordinance of the Town of Florence, Pinal County, Arizona by inserting 73.12, abandoned or junk vehicles parked in visible areas, renumber unarmed police aids 73-13, and inserting a new penalty 73.99. The first reading was held on November 4th, 2019. Chief Daniel Hughes.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members, last time we were here, there were a couple of questions. Councilmember Larson asked about, could we give them 7 days instead of 5 business days? We inserted that language. And also there were some questions about vehicles and could they be given away or donated? I found a number of lists, everything from veterans associations, donations to Make-A-Wish, to even selling your vehicles to different, so I have that available. And hopefully that'll answer your questions, but I'm available for any other questions you might have.
When we write a citation, are we going to have a little paper to give to the people along with the citation stating some of these organizations and options that they have? Because a lot of these people might not be aware of that.
Absolutely, you asked for that, and we'll do that. My goal is to make this a separate citation. Really, the goal is education and just get them cleaned up.
Sure.
The idea is not to, unless we're absolutely forced to take action.
Oh, no,
It's just to get it cleaned up. So the first thing we do is probably an education, go around and educate long before we would give anyone a citation. Citations are really for, if we're forced to, that someone just absolutely won't. And as I said, and as you well know, it's already in the town code now. We just want to bring it to the forefront so that we can help code enforcement and help move things along.
And I think that's important as well, just to communicate, because there was some confusion amongst residents as well when they thought this was a new item entirely that was being brought forward, that it was already in our town code. We're just also bringing it over into this section.
Yes, that's correct.
Councilmember Cortez.
I have just a couple questions and a statement. It still reads 5 business days. That did not get changed. You said it was changed to 7. It still shows 5 business days.
We actually changed it to 5 business days, so you're going to get 7 days.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, I should have
Okay.
corrected that.
And then, so just for some clarification, because after the last meeting, there was some discussion in social media and just in general in public. So I just want to clarify, if somebody has a vehicle that is non-operable and it's sitting in their driveway, does that fall under this ordinance?
Yes, it does. If it's unlicensed, that's under the current ordinance right now.
If it's in their backyard, but it's still visible because it's a chain link fence or whatever their fencing is. Does that fall under the ordinance?
No, what we're looking for is basically in the front yard. If you, as we said, if you're gonna move it where it's not readily visible from, we're not gonna go looking for it. If it's not readily visible, it's not gonna be addressed. What we're looking for is those that are in the front yard or.
Would it be safe to say those that are not within a fenced area?
Yes. Those that are.
As long as it's fenced inside your yard, even if it's in the front yard, but it's in the fenced part of your front yard, or are we gonna make them move it out of their front yard?
If it's in a fenced-in area, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for those that are both unsightly, but also a hazard of some sort. That's what we're looking for. If it's in a fenced-in area, and most of this, just so you know, is gonna be probably complaint-driven as it is now. Neighbors are gonna call up and say, listen, I'm tired of having this car next door. It's up on jacks, it's sitting in the front yard. You need to do something about this. A lot of this is gonna be complaint-driven, and we'll take a look at it.
These were just some of the comments that were made, so I'm just clarifying for people that they understand that when it's sitting on the side of your house, in the gray area, nobody really knows if it's, a right-of-way or something, it is gonna fall under this ordinance. If it's sitting in the front of the house in the driveway on blocks, it's gonna fall under this ordinance because it's a safety hazard, correct?
Absolutely.
That's what I was just looking for, that. Just kind of a clarification, because it was quite the discussion that was going on, and I wanted people to hear what's gonna qualify and what's not gonna qualify. Thank you.
Councilmember Larson?
I just wanted to build on that. It does say that all abandoned or junk vehicles or vehicles while being repaired or restored shall be stored in an enclosed area by the owner, so enclosed area, or occupant of the property upon which the vehicle is located in such a manner as to not be visible from any point laying outside the property upon which the abandoned or junk vehicle is stored or parked. So according to what I'm reading here, it cannot be visible. So if it's in the back enclosed, but it's still visible, then to me, that sounds like right here, it would still qualify.
We went ahead and used the same language as currently in there. It's not our intent to go looking for, right now you can see a lot of vehicles in the backyard. We're not gonna go up into your property and look to see if we're not gonna go on your property. We're gonna look at ones that are out front, visible, that are concerning a problem. If you're concerned, we could again look at change that language. I left that in there because that is what is in the current, it is in the current language. The intent is, if it's in your backyard in a fenced-in area, we're not gonna go looking for that. What we wanna do is address the problem on the front of residents, and as I said, this is throughout our entire community. This is also Anthem. We've had several complaints of vehicles with flat tires sitting in the front driveway that are unlicensed. Some of them are not running, so that's where we're at on this.
Are there any other questions or comments? Is there anybody that came from the public this evening that has any questions or comments? Yes, sir, come on up. If you could come up to the podium.
I just want to know what
Could you
definition.
just state your name? I'm so sorry.
Kenneth Erickson.
Thank you.
I was just wondering what the definition of a junk vehicle is. Because I have vehicles that I restore, and some people consider them junk, some people don't. That's my question.
Excellent. Chief, can you explain that?
Yeah.
I don't have a copy of it right in front, but a junked vehicle is one that is unlicensed, that is in won't run, it is in major disrepair, that needs motor, and there was 3 of them, and I can't remember what the other one is.
So if I'm restoring a vehicle and I have it stripped down to nothing, I would have to get rid of it.
No, if it's stripped down and it's in the back in a fenced-in area, you're not gonna have to get rid of it. If it's sitting in your driveway and it's in major repair, If it's going to be sitting there for a long time, then you're going to have to move it. You don't have to get rid of anything. We're not asking people to get rid of anything. We're simply asking them to move it out of the front into a fenced-in area or into a garage or somewhere where it's not going to be accessible as a issue.
I can read
As
it.
long as it's not acceptable to somebody just walking down the
Microphone, please.
Mr. Erickson, I can't hear you.
Sorry, I was wanting to clarify, as long as it's not acceptable to somebody just walking down the street.
Oh,
My
okay,
question.
I understand. No, it wouldn't be that. That's my understanding now.
I can read it to you. It says it right here. It's item B. It says abandon or junk vehicles, a vehicle or any major portion thereof which is incapable of movement under its own power and will remain so without major repair or reconstruction, or a vehicle not having current license and registration. So those are the guidelines that are set.
Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome. Did that answer your questions or?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. All right. If there's no further questions or comments, I need direction from the council.
I'll make a motion to adopt ordinance number 684-19.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. All right, let me get back up. I apologize. My computer was at page like 400. New business, item 10A. Discussion and possible action of the creation of an economic development department and/or commission. Vice Mayor Anderson.
Thank you. My intent here is to try to get something on a future agenda that would allow us to adopt a salary schedule and a job description. Now, we've included in the package tonight a whole quandary of job descriptions. The one that I prefer is the Pinal County job description. And I think we can look at that job description, and I hope the county doesn't mind me copying their job description. But take that job description and take out the word Pinal County and put it in the town of Florence. And also add that we want to be a partner with Pinal County. I think that, if I recall, the job description talks about working with the state and with some of the other economic development organizations. I think we want to do that also. So my recommendation is that we look at the Pinal County job description. Unless some people have other ideas they want to add to it, that's fine.
Are there any questions or comments? Councilmember Larson.
I just wanted to ask, I know that obviously we had a history of having this position open in the past. Lisa, would you mind giving us a little bit of history as far as how we filled that position in the past, why we took that position away, just some more history, I guess.
Well, I'm going to be speaking off the top of my head, so I apologize. The first time we've ever had the position, I remember James Webb was our economic development director. That at that time, that his focus was on Tequila Sunrise Express, and that would be the passenger rail between the town of Florence and Kearney. That didn't go well, and the town moved away from having an economic development director. 3 or 4 years passed, the town once again had an economic development coordinator at that time. They downsized the position from a director to a coordinator, and they filled it. It stayed filled for several years until Mr. Charles Montoya came to work for the town of Florence, and at that time the position was dissolved.
Thank you.
Well,
Councilmember Hawkins.
these salaries back there for the director positions, I see all they run the gamut, but it's going to take more than just one person. This is a director, so they're going to have people working under them, so we're starting a whole new department. But also on part of it, it says the responsible would be the director would be responsible for planning and creation of economic development, marketing strategies, and implementation of efforts to attract and retain business and industry into the town of Florence. Once again, I don't know that we need to keep wasting our time trying to bring in industry when we're so far away from any major freeway. We don't have a major rail. We don't even have an airport. So I don't know of any industries that would look to us when they're, they've got a lot of other options not that far away. I mean, why? It just doesn't. Industry, I think, we ought to be concentrating on what we have and sell what we have, which is, recreation, tourism, quality of life. We're a safe, quiet community. I think quality of life is a big seller. If you look at a lot of your, like Green Valley, and where there's a lot of retirees, in other words, I think that's, that's just my opinion. I mean, we've tried bringing in different industries in the past, and nothing ever seems to happen. And I don't really know that. I think if we would just, with the amount of money we're talking about here, I think we could use that money to promote the town and maybe help with some zero interest loans or grants or whatever to help the businesses we have here now to improve what they have. And anyway, I think staff, we can do the advertising and whatever. But anyway, that's my opinion.
Councilmember Wall?
I think we all have a different idea of what economic development means to us. From my perspective, I would like to see a specific plan and what it would cost, but I also think this needs to go hand in hand with the revisions that we're contemplating to our strategic plan. I don't think we can make a decision or move forward until we have reached an agreement on that. And obviously, we have to include any costs in our upcoming budget because these costs are obviously very significant and they're not included in our current budget. So I think we've got a few boxes to check before we can move forward in a concrete manner.
Thank you. Councilmember Hughes?
I think we're in a time in our town that we need an economic development director. I think that to expect a town manager to play dual and triple roles, it's not efficiency for him. He needs to be able to run the town, and there needs to be a dedicated person that deals with the area, with other economic development, with the region that gets what our town is. And I think that having a dedication, a department that's dedicated in getting the data, there's all kinds of information that needs to be collected. That who's going to do that? Brent doesn't have the time to do that.
I don't know who motioned me first.
Oh, we thought you were just going. We thought you were just
Going down the aisle.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Councilmember Cortez.
So I think that it's very important that we have an economic development director, coordinator, but someone that's their job. That's all they do, is think of how to get people to this town, to open businesses, to bring their industries. There's more than just industries that need railway and highways. There's other types of industries, but that it's very important that we have somebody that's their job. And correct me if I'm wrong, Becky, but somewhere I thought in our budget, I saw that there is an economic development line. And I think we've asked about it before, and we've said, oh, well, we noticed some money came out of that. What did it go for? So we have that we do have money already set aside for that, which then could help cover this person's salary because it's already paying someone to do something. And we do have staff that already works on it. Ben Bitter works on economic development. So if we have a director, he would just still fall right where he's at and be helping them develop the department and helping them do their job. Jennifer helps with that stuff. So we already have staff that they are already doing those jobs. We just need a dedicated person that daily is giving them direction and helping them not be so kind of like this, like trying to do too many things and trying to be the person coming up with the ideas and then thinning our manager out too thin to where then maybe some of the other things that we need him to focus on, he's not able to focus on like maybe I feel like he should be. Not at the moment off the top of my head, but just saying. And then I think that if we're gonna go down this avenue, we as a council need to have a very clear and precise vision of what this person's role is, what we expect from them, and an understanding that it will not happen in 1 year, that it will not happen in 2 years or 3 years. It could be 5 or 6 or 10 years down the road before we finally see the fruits of their labor, because economic development does not happen overnight. So I just want to make sure that we all understand that if we hired somebody, that next year we can't fire them because they didn't, in our idea, didn't accomplish anything, because it could be just getting out there and starting those little fires, and it might take a little bit of time to get it going. Nothing moves fast. That is what I've learned since I've been here, is nothing moves fast. And I'm sitting here going, why does it take so long to get this meeting done? Or why does it take so long to get this brought to us? Because it's just the process. And an economic development process is not quick, especially when you're already kind of behind the ball. We got to get caught up to the ball to then get in front of the ball. So that's, I'll support any idea of at least looking at it. I always say I'm always willing to have a conversation. Doesn't mean I'm for or against. I want to have the conversation, but I just want to make sure that we as a council have a really good idea of what we want from this person. If that's what we're going to do, is go ahead and move forward with one. What do we want from them? What are our expectations?
And I'm going down and then I'll loop back.
So I agree with a lot of the things that you said about this position. We would need vision and certain expectations. I agree with that. And also, to your point, a lot of analogies are running through my head right now, but that we have to catch up to the ball, right? So to me, I've always said since day one that healthy things grow, okay? And I feel like right now we are at a point with our businesses where we're hearing about how they're struggling to survive. And I want to do what we can to help those businesses not just survive, but thrive. And I want to see all those businesses down there full. I want to see them all occupied and having events that we're bringing in these people. Now, when I look at the line item and I'm looking at the minimum wage of this, just the director, just the comparables here, was $71,604, and the maximum was $230,006. When I look at those dollar amounts and I think about that as an annual expected budget for just that one person and the impact that we could make with that much money by hosting events through collaboration to bring business down, I think that would be a much better use of those funds to support the businesses we already have. And when healthy things are growing, it attracts attention. And then you've got organic growth happening from outside companies that are looking, look at what Florence is doing. And I don't want to sell us short as far as our positioning or highways or airport and all of that, because we are in such a great location. I think that we do offer so many great things as a community. I mean, look at how much we're growing just from the residents that are coming in. Clearly, they see the value that we have. So for me, when I look at this dollar amount, I can't voluntarily say I would get on board with that. I do agree that when we reach that point, we do have to have a vision that's very clear and concise. We do have to have expectations that are very clearly set. But I just don't feel that we're caught up to that ball yet. I feel that that money, no matter what the analysis says, could be used so much better through collaboration with our existing partners. And yes, I do believe that Brent and Ben and Jennifer are doing an exceptional job with what they're working right now, and they're working their hardest to get us to that point. But I think that, like I said, the money could be better used in other areas.
Councilmember Hawkins?
Well, when it came to industry, I was, you know, there's so many different kinds. I mean, you can run the gamut. You can have I suppose, like we were going to have, like a research and development type deal or whatever that was. But what I was talking about is heavy industry. I don't, you know, that's what I was referring to when you say industry. Companies are one thing, but anyway, like I said, and I agree with Kristen there totally, that I think the money would be better spent getting what we have to sell up to snuff, get everything, you make it a place people want to come to start with, not try to get people to come here and Main Street and everything be what it is at the moment. I think if we're going to spend, if we do it for 10 years, if we have to do it for 10 years, at a minimum, it's going to be probably $150 or $1.5 million or $2 million. Well, I think that money would, I think, put Main Street on the map if we could give out grants or zero interest loans, get Main Street going and blowing. Yeah, then we have something to sell. That our economic development director would have something to sell. But, you know, we're at a point right now, we're kind of in limbo, we're in between. There's a lot of businesses that are really putting their foot forward and trying to improve their businesses and improve the Main Street. And with our activities that we just okayed this evening, money could help on those too, to make those events bigger or double them, maybe twice a year, you know. I think we need to improve what we have before we can sell it.
So I have to add to that. I agree. You know, like I said, I'm not set on one way or the other. But what I hear time and time again is, oh, it's a private business. We can't invest our money in that private business. Oh, it's not our responsibility. So if council's going to sit up here and say, let's take that $230,000 and let's invest it in our community, well, then let's commit to doing that. We have to do one or the other. We either got to take that money and invest it into our community by giving grants or small business loans or whatever we're legally allowed to do, or we have to take it and put it in the hands of somebody that knows how to do this, instead of those of us that might entertain ourselves in it. If you know, there's a difference between somebody that this is all they do, eat, sleep, and breathe economic development, versus people who they understand it, they kind of know how to do it, but there's a huge difference in that. And so we have to decide, if we're not going to do an economic development director or a coordinator, then we have to really commit to putting that money back into our community, because it's not being put into our community. We come up with excuses as to why we can't do this. Oh, we can't do it because it's this, or we can't. We just have to sit back and say, okay, we as a council are making this commitment. Staff, you find a way for us to do it. And I'm good either way. I just want to see us move forward and invest in our community, either with a director or with actually, like Bill said, doing grants and other ways we could help our businesses and our residents improve their properties and make their businesses profitable, like Larson said.
My question, I want to ask our town manager, Mr. Billingsley. I understand, you network, you communicate a lot with other town managers, other municipalities. And the history, we've had economic development directors, coordinators in the past, not quite sure why the decision was made to not continue on with it at that time. However, seeing where we are now in our community and hearing what we've heard from our council this evening and knowing the connections that you have through your organizations, we heard from a gentleman earlier from the ambulance service about, a feasibility study or going out and finding out what would fit in our community. Where would we be best served spending our money? Because all of us want to make that positive impact in our community, especially in regards to economic development.
Wow. Thank you for asking me the question. I appreciate it. And I appreciate the ability to provide some input to you, Mayor, and council members with respect to it. Tim's actually in the audience this evening from Pinal County. Yes, we do a lot of coordinating, a lot of discussions. As a matter of fact, we had a Pinal County Economic Development Summit last week that Tim sponsored down at Pinal County. And one of the things that I took away from that meeting, and thank you, Tim, for setting that up, is that other people in Pinal County think that that Florence is doing a great job. And they talked last week about some of our efforts, creative ideas, the changes that have occurred on Main Street, how many businesses are open on Main Street, and some of the acknowledgments that Florence is getting for some of the efforts that we're making. And that makes me feel good when we have those conversations and we talk with those other communities. I agree with everything that every council member said, because they're all right. I agree, we do need some assistance. I agree it would be a benefit to the town to have a person that lives, breathes, and sleeps economic development in the town. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess here that one of the reasons why we don't have an ED designated person now is budget reasons. We've been very fiscally conservative with our budgets. As you know, when I first came to Florence 4 years ago, we were $1.6 million in the red. And due to the leadership of the council, we were able to put over $200,000 away in our rainy day funds and turn that $1.6 million deficit into putting some funds away. And we've put some funds away every year in the last 4 years. The last 2 years, there's been a significant discussion and a request that has been made with respect to the Budget Committee. And many of you have served on the Budget Committee the last 2 years, including this last year, where Economic Development Director was once again considered by the Budget Committee themselves, and that didn't come forward as a recommendation. Primarily for budget reasons, because we have to cut from somewhere to add more funding. And that's always a difficult conversation when that occurs in the spring of every year, and we're looking at the different requests. The decisions to add positions this last year were tied to police and fire positions, and so the Budget Committee and ultimately the council put those funds towards the police and fire department, and that's the decision that was made at that time. I really heard what Councilmember Wall said earlier. I'm concerned from where I sit until we finish the strategic planning process and we see where the priorities of the whole council are and what we see as economic development and where we want to put those funds at the forefront. I think that is a very astute comment made by Councilmember Wall, and I think it would be folly to distribute funds in an area before we realize what our specific expertise we might look for in that position. back to Mr. Hawkins' comment regarding industry. One of the things that I have heard from council members as well as from members of the public is we need industry. We need jobs with respect to industry, and for most of the time that talks about industrial growth and industrial development. We have one property in Florence that's zoned industrial at this time. If we really want to go after industrial growth, then we need to concentrate on amending our general plan and our zoning ordinances to provide more areas for industry, because at this time, we don't have any. So that's always a challenge when we look at these things. These are things that we can bite off. These are things that we can change piece by piece, but it is a logical process that is followed. I say that to say, if you're looking for a recommendation from me, I think it would be tremendously valuable to seek outside assistance once we conclude the strategic planning process and see where council envisions economic development going forward, and hire an actual professional consultant to come in and develop a plan based on our existing metrics, based on our socioeconomic factors, our zoning, our infrastructure, the cost to expand infrastructure, all these things that a professional could look at, much like what Dave and the consultant spoke about from the CON perspective, a feasibility study, if you will, to see what our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are as a community. There's a couple of different ways to go about that, and I've reached out to consultants and I've actually met with them with respect to it. The first, if it was council's vision, and I actually have a scope and a cost estimate, a proposal that's already been provided, is we could do some form of a quick and dirty economic development analysis of the town based on our existing information that's from readily available sources, places like Esri. That could be done fairly inexpensively under my spending authority to get a baseline document that could be utilized in the strategic plan process. That's something that could occur. I already have a consultant. They're on the state bid list. We've already met with them. We've already been through somewhat of a screening process and determined they would be a good fit to provide this feasibility study. That can be done under my existing authority if that's something that council would like. The second level is communities that are serious about economic development typically bring in a consultant and do a full-fledged economic development report on the community. That's considerably more expensive. That's probably from $150,000 to $250,000. If we wanted to undertake that, we could do that as well. That is probably a 6-9 month process to go through that. That's something we would have to put out to bid. We would get responses. That's another option. To close my statements, there are many options out there, but in all cases, I think it's a conversation that we should have during the budget process, because although we have an economic development budget, it's very small. It includes a marketing component, a mailing component, and part of Mr. Bitter's salary. So to say that we have additional money that could be leveraged towards that salary, that doesn't exist at this time. We would have to go and find funds in the budget and then transfer that into economic development to actually hire somebody to do that job. This is a conversation that I think we should get really serious about in the spring when we're formulating the budget and figure out at that time where the funding would come from, the type of metrics that we'd like to use, not only in what is the job description and the expectations of that position, but those metrics that could be utilized on an annual basis on how to evaluate the person or persons that's placed in that role. So I think I'll shut up now, but hopefully that was helpful.
That was very helpful, and I just want to point out, Tim, I want to thank you for being here as well this evening. Do you have any insight or suggestions that you'd like to share as well at this time?
I've never known Tim to not want to talk. I'm tired. That's what it is. It's been a long day. Good evening, everyone. Economic development is different for everyone, as you just said. It really, truly is. Everybody's got their own idea of economic development. And economic development is a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you do nothing, nothing's going to happen. And that's exactly right. All you guys said a great thing, so did Brent. Economic development, when I first started for the county, if you remember in 2009, our county was in really bad shape. It was in really bad shape. If You'll remember we even had our county manager in the gated community across the street, and he resided over there for about 4 or 5 years. But our county was really in bad straits. We had to do something, and that was one of the things. We did it almost out of desperation because something had to happen. We'd put all of our time and effort and everything into houses. That was what they thought economic development was at that time. That about bankrupted the county, about bankrupted the state, and about bankrupted the nation all at the one time because they thought growth created growth. Now, as we said, economic development means a little bit to everything. Most people, what my job is at the county is I bring in big businesses. That is my job. I don't bring in retail and I don't bring in industrial or any type of retail or residential. I don't touch that. We got other departments that do that. And the reason why is because we're trying to create what we call is, or the head of household jobs, primary jobs. That's the word I was trying to come up. Because the primary jobs with what I do, because I work with a county that is bigger in Connecticut. And that's one of the things we always have to keep consideration. It's a little bit different, 65 square miles. We've got, almost 500,000 people in our county. So one of the things that what I do is I focus on the industrial part because those are sustainable jobs. They pay very well, and they just don't come and go like a lot of retail does. You'll see retail come and go all the time. We've seen it on Main Street and everything else in Santan Valley and everywhere. Because they come and go, because there's not a whole lot of money involved, and they just come and go. They don't plan very well, and some things happen in retail that just are strange to begin with. Most industry, when you see $1 billion company like Lucid Motors, I don't imagine they're going to leave anytime soon. They can't. There's just too much involved in it. So that's one of the reasons why the county asked me to come in, and that's what I do. I bring that because, again, then that creates the need for the homes. That creates the need for the retail. We were actually doing this backwards. We were building homes hoping the retail would come in and would bring in jobs, and that just is not the way it works, folks. We had it completely backwards. So when we talk about that, but one of the things they did before I even come on board in the fall of 2000, I've been here just 10 years, was they did a big study and a plan. What are we going to do? What shared vision did they have before they hired me? Because they wanted somebody that could come in and do industrial, but if they had picked something else, I wouldn't have been the person. Because that's what I even did at the state of Arizona. I did nothing but bring in big industry. That's all I've ever done. That's what I was trained to do, and that's what my education's in. If they said that we want to bring in retail, they'd have gotten somebody different because I just don't feel that. Now, one of the things that Mr. Hawkins, excuse me, sorry about that. I talked to Mr. Haskins today. Mr. Hawkins brought up was it's not all about industry. A community like this, we need all kinds of retail. We need all kinds of different things besides industry. And Brent's right. You do not have in place what it would take to bring industry here. There just isn't enough here yet. When we're talking about the county, when I bring it, look where we're taking you. These big companies like Nikola and Lucid, they're 500 acres. They have rail. They have huge power. They have huge gas and a tremendous amount of water use. That's what brings those kind of companies in. They have to have the workforce because each one of these is going to hire over 2,000 people. That is a tremendous amount of workforce you got to have, and it's got to be local. It's got to be fairly close. So as again, you have to kind of plan on what you're doing. And Brent brought up a very good thing. You guys are going to have to get together, and you guys are going to have to create a shared vision of what you want this town to be when it grows up. Because we had to do that at the county. Folks, we did it on a massive scale, but we said, this is what we want to do, and this is where we're going to get it. So when we started up the bus, it said Pinal County Economic Development on it, and we started going. We haven't wavered at all. We took our strategic plan, and other than we've changed, I think, 3 words the last time we were there, we actually just changed a little bit. That was it. That's all we really ever changed. You guys need to put together a strategic plan that says exactly your goals and your objectives of what it is you want to do, and then go hire the person that fits that. That's what the county did for me. They said, okay, so they interviewed 3 of us that did this for the state. And that was one of the reasons why they said, look, we have to do it this way, and that's what we've become. So to give you an idea of how successful that was in doing that, since January 1st of 2013, when we went from 3 supervisors to 5, we brought in over $8 billion worth of companies into this state, or this county. $8 billion, which represents about 9,500 brand new jobs. But now that's not one little area. This is all over the county, folks. This is the entire county, and we're 5,400 square miles. So when you're talking about 65 square miles here, somewhere around in that. Okay, now we're talking about a microcosm, what you're going to be able to do. But there's a lot of things you guys can put into place. And one of the things the county is doing to make sure that all our communities are involved, I don't know if Brent's mentioned it, but we're working right now what's called the Arizona Innovation and Technology Corridor. Folks, this thing has taken off like a rock. It's even kind of shocked me because we didn't think we'd get that much momentum. We're working with U of A. They're doing a $300,000 study for us right now. And they're going to identify where every piece of land is that we can use for technology and those types of businesses. And as I've explained, all the communities are going to have a part in this, whether it's through workforce or some of the ancillary operations, because some of the big companies, they don't always want to be in one place, but they do have opportunities. And no, it doesn't require rail. It doesn't even really require freeway or anything like that. You have to have the technology. You got to have a good infrastructure with telecom. That's going to be the key to everything. And some of this stuff's already being put in place in this area with Zayo and things like that. So we're trying to figure this all out. Now, it's going to take a lot from what you guys are going to do, because I've talked to several of you already about what we can and cannot do. I've been a resident now here for 10 years. It'll be 10 years in March of next year, excuse me. So I've lived in this town 10 years, and I've seen all kinds of different growth. And I work with Scott Bowles. I work with Scott, what was first Scott's name? Scott Powell. I worked with both of them. I haven't actually worked with Scott Powell after he left here when he was with, I believe it was Tempe. So I've seen what has come and gone here, and I've seen you guys have done a great job. Everybody's doing a great job. But again, if we don't do anything, folks, nothing's going to happen. What is it you want what does everybody want this town to be? I mean, that's a question. We knew what we wanted to do in the county, and we've made it happen. But it's taken a tremendous lot of work and a lot of planning. And I've been a little bit more fortunate because we have more money to spend. When I first started in 2009, my whole entire budget as a program under the county manager was my wages and $5,000 for gasoline for a car that barely runs. Last year, it was just shy of $1 million was my budget. Next year will be about $1.5 million. That's how much we have progressed with our marketing, because we're doing marketing for everybody. We're trying to take the place of what a lot of the communities don't have as money. We know that. So the county's trying to take up the slack on that. And we've done a pretty good job on it. But Councilmember Cordes, you're exactly right. We have to make things happen. If we don't, nothing will happen, and somebody else will do it for us. And that was one of the things we were scared to death. If Pinal County didn't get in gear, guess who's going to do it for us? Maricopa County and Pima County. And they are always trying, all the time, believe me. But so we've made a pretty good inroads on that ourselves. And let me tell you, it's been remarkable. We've been able to accomplish in 7 years, and I've been doing this for 26 years, folks. We've been able to accomplish in 7 years what some cities and some towns and bigger cities take decades to do, but we've been able to do it. And we're looking forward. Folks, we're going to have an announcement after the first year for a company that's bigger than both Nikola and Lucid both together. That's what we're putting together. These are the types of projects we're getting, but we have to have communities like this, like Florence, to be able to help support all that, and you guys make you guys successful too. Because we all benefit. We all benefit. And that's the idea behind that big corridor. We're all going to benefit from this. The U of A estimated, this is years ago, they estimated the corridor was going to be Tucson and Phoenix, but they couldn't figure out how to get across Pinal County because we had nothing. We had nothing. They were shocked when we were the ones who approached them about wanting to do the corridor. So Brent met with the guy the other day. His name is Professor Greg Watson. He is with the McGuire Center of Entrepreneurship. It was underneath the Keller Business Division. Now it's going to be directly under the president of the University of Arizona because of what we're doing with this corridor. They moved the entire thing because of our corridor. Now we're going to report directly with the president. So it can be done, but you're going to have to plan it. It took us, we're still planning all the time. We constantly plan all the time. So I want to see things happen, guys. I live right up the street. I probably live closer than any of you folks do. But one of the gentlemen used to be, one of the council members lived right across the street from me. So, but anyway, we had been a tie for that. So.
Mr. Smith.
But it can be done. What is it you guys want to do? But you're all going to have to agree on it. You're going to have a shared vision of what you want to do with this community. And it's incredible what the potential is here, but you're going to have to put it together. No one would ever believe we could have done with Pinal County, make believers out of everybody with Florence. Because you guys are up there, you're the ones that's gonna make it happen. You get to vote. I don't get to vote. I can cry, scream, and holler, and cuss all I want to supervisors, but they're actually the ones that vote.
Right.
Any questions? I mean, there's about a big, we could take this for about 10 hours if you want, so nobody wants to do that.
No, but I do want to thank you for, being here this evening, sharing your insight, and I look forward to you accompanying us on this trip as we go through our strategic plan and answer just what has been proposed by multiple members here this evening. What is our future? What is our strategic plan for economic development? And that's something that we're all looking forward to discuss, and I look forward to seeing you at our work session as well.
Well, all of you had great ideas. That's what we need. Put them all together. Let's put them all together and let's make that happen. We can put a plan together that makes it work. You got the staff here that's got the talent to do it. You got the folks up there that got the votes to do it. But we got to have the same vision of what we're going to do. And that's the only reason why we've been successful at the Board of Supervisors, because all 5 of them, 4 Republicans and the Democrat, believe it or not, they all have the same vision. They want to raise the quality of life, which we've done. We've lowered the poverty rate to the lowest in the state of Arizona. Can you imagine that, Pinal County? That's a shock even in itself. Our unemployment last week was 4.5%. When I first started in 2009, folks, it was 13.2%, highest we ever had. Shocking high. We were in debt so bad that if we'd had to borrow money, I don't know who we borrowed off of. But now we've got a very good bond rating. We even bought the land that Lucid Motors sits on for $31 million. First time a county in the state of Arizona had ever done anything like that. That's how far-reaching you got to be. You got to think outside the box. I hate to use that term because you hear it all the time, but we truly have. We've thought outside the box. We have to be different. We have to change. And that's what Florence can do too. Be different. You don't have to be like everybody else. Good Lord, don't be like everybody else. Be Florence, and that's what we got to do. I think actually the greatest thing you can say is, this is Florence, and let's be Florence. Let's don't be Casa Grande. You can't compete. They got 2 freeways over there, and they got the main rail going right there, so don't even try to compete. Be what you guys can be here. We can be something that's so different, just so magnificent, it make everybody go to shame, and we can do it, because we're certainly proving it with Pinal County. You know, our economic development growth was 5 times higher than Pima County's last year. 5 times bigger. And that county is about 3 times bigger than we are in population. So it can be done.
Excellent. And hey, you know what? Maybe with our feasibility study for the ambulances, we'll save money from our general fund there because we'll have other revenue coming in. So we'll be able to allot money towards that economic development. This is all, big wishes, but we're looking forward to exploring all of our options and continuing to grow. Councilmember Larson had a question, and then Vice Mayor.
Not necessarily for you, but I feel like, we went through the strategic plan process before, and we clearly identified on there that this was a priority. We continue to talk about it up here. So what I'm curious about is you had mentioned that there's numerous codes that we could possibly look at as far as possibly changing as well as zoning elements. I know we had brought up zoning before when we had talked about the tattoo parlor issue downtown. So again, why don't we bring this stuff up? Why do we have to wait and kick the can down the road for more strategic planning and more vision when we've already clearly identified this repetitively that this is something we want to take on? Why not start taking those little chunks off of things?
We have been. We are going to start in 2020 our 3rd year of implementation of the general plan process. Very expensive, spread over multiple years. We started 2 years ago. We're in the middle of it now, and we're just kicking into the final phase of the general plan and the redevelopment plan now. But we had to spread that funding over a 3-year process. That's how we make those changes to general plan areas, zoning, et cetera. There's a process that you follow, to Ms. Cortez's point, that also includes public input, these various elements, et cetera. So we're getting into the last phase of that in 2020 with respect to the general plan.
So when can we expect that we'd be able to discuss those items and possibly change those items?
That discussion will begin in the spring. I'm looking at Larry, but our timeline is, you guys awarded the contract and we gave notice to proceed a month ago. So I would guess the spring is when we'll start talking about land use categories and land use planning for the community.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
I want to thank Tim for coming tonight and giving his perspective on this. I'm quite excited about this. My intent tonight with my agenda item was just what we are going to vote on, is to try to get something on a future agenda to establish an economic development department and possibly hire a manager for that department. And I would think that person would work with or work after our strategic plan is developed. We absolutely have to have a strategic plan. I'm not trying to replace the strategic plan, but I'm just, I'm trying to kick the can down the road. We keep talking about this, and, our staff is doing an excellent job, but none of them have the time to really devote to this. We absolutely need somebody who's going to specialize in this and take responsibility for this. Somebody who's going to go over and sit in Tim's office with him all day long and say, how do I get part of that $1 million that he just got, because he's getting a lot of money for economic development, and we're probably the only town in the county that's not participating in that. All the other major towns in the county have an economic development department, is that right?
That is correct. Yes, it is.
Okay.
But they put in plans into place quite some time ago.
Yeah.
And you guys are just a little bit behind, but that's eventually what's going to happen. It's going to take eventually somebody full-time, and that's all they do. Because that's what has made it successful for the county. That's all I do. That's every hour of every day, all I would spend on at work is economic development. I don't think about absolutely anything else. They don't even ask me to go even put up chairs and stuff at any type of events, because that's all I do. And that's what I'm paid to do.
Thank you.
And we got to that point. That was what was necessary.
So I have two questions. First is, if we moved forward with the creation of the Economic Development Department or Commission, is that committing financial dollars at this time? Second part of that question is, would we be best served with you having what you referred to like that fast track feasibility study to determine what would be best in our community? How would we be served best? And how long would that timeline take?
So the scope of work that I have right now, quick and dirty, using available data. It's a consultant that Tim knows very well. I'm not going to say a public, but it's a on the state bidder list, already pre-qualified by the state, that's done a lot of work in Pinal County. 3 to 4 months to do their quick and dirty, and once again, below $25,000 cost, because that's what I have the authority to do.
Okay. And if we moved forward this evening in regards to a creation, is that tying us, or is that something that would need to come back to us to approve, especially considering there would be dollar amounts tied to it? We don't know what that necessarily encompasses at this time.
I would want to bring that back at a future meeting so that you get an opportunity to take a look at the scope of work, what that means, and the product, to make sure that that's something that you think would be viable and useful. My personal opinion is that that quick and dirty study, that feasibility study, if you will, could be utilized to make our visioning sessions with the strategic plan and those work sessions more useful in terms of getting an outside expert's opinion on our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, so that when we identify what those goals are for that economic development section of strategic plan, you have a basis to make those decisions. And Councilmember Quarters is exactly right. We don't have the staff time right now to devote to put something together. And quite honestly, I think it would be useful to have an outside entity do that. When it comes to funding a position, my personal opinion is we should make that decision during the budget process, because I don't know where we're going to cut from to come up with that money right now in terms of our budget, our balanced budget.
Well, that's one of the other reasons that I want to get this on the agenda, so we can get it in our budget process and, try to figure out how we're going to fund it. And, is it going to be one person, 2 people, a consultant, or what? But we need to move on this. And that's my whole purpose of trying to get this on an agenda item tonight.
Is it possible that we could do the quick and dirty? Because I can't remember what you said. That just keeps sticking in my head, quick and dirty.
Fast track.
The fast track.
He said quick.
Is it feasible to do the fast track, get our strategic plan, vision done so that we know what we're doing, what we want, to have it all ready by budget season?
Yes, ma'am.
So really, we could kind of look at this, John, as ordering the saying go ahead and do the fast track, because that's going to get us moving in a direction that also is going to help us with our strategic plan.
Yes.
Is that going to hold up what we're doing right now with all of that, though?
No.
Okay, so it's just going to be moving us all in a direction that at the end, hopefully, if this is what we decide to do, we have a very clear, concise vision of what we want to do so that we know how to sit at the table with the county. Because I think right now, if we sat at the table with the county, we're just like, well, we don't really know what we want to do. We don't know this. And it wouldn't be beneficial to any of us. So if we started with the fast track, helped with our strategic plan, then it would be ready for budget. And then it probably, in my crazy mind, would be more successful in a budget conversation because we would have more data to support why we needed it, or we would have the data to say, this is why you don't need it.
Absolutely. I think that it serves all those functions. The only thing I disagree with is we do sit at the county and we do work with the county on a number of things. We've done some joint agreements and we've participated together and had some success. So that will continue.
And absolutely, that's certainly, I wanted to remind you guys, again, you know, that's my job, and I've already been given clearance by the county manager that I can help and assist when I can. Of course, you know, I'm also busy too, but I'll be more than willing to help. Again, I live two, 3 blocks up the street up here, right by the courthouse. But again, you know, one of the things we've done at the county, we have made sure that everybody knows we're the county seat. You know, that wasn't being done before I got there. It really truly was. We make sure our clients are here. We make sure that we have almost all the major meetings we have here in Florence. And we do. We have them at the library. We also have them at the courthouse.
Yep.
Because that was something I think everybody forgot was where the power was, because everybody thought it was Casa Grande. Nothing wrong with Casa Grande, but because it was the biggest. But we have brought that back. Everybody knows Florence is a county seat now. And that's something we make sure we have, not my department, everybody's department is. And that is something because we truly believe in that. And we know that things can happen. But again, it's going to take everybody working together. And I will help absolutely any way I can. As much time as I have that I can do it.
Of all the things that you mentioned, Councilmember Cortez, the one that I don't want to be lost on the council is if we go through this exercise and we prepare for the budget, it puts us in a much better position of understanding who we want to hire. Because I think what you're going to find out is we're not going to want to hire somebody like Tim that tries to recruit industry, because we're not in a real good position to recruit industry. We might look for somebody that has a separate skill set that fits our strengths and opportunities and not our weaknesses, if that makes sense. So it could really help us to do that visioning, make sure it's part of the strategic plan, and make sure that we set up that job description and we recruit for that position for the right person to fill that job. Just not a person to fill the job, the right person to fill that job.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to table my agenda item.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Excellent conversation this evening, and thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Knavel.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I said thank you.
Brent, how long will it take to recruit once we get to that point?
It'll be about 2.5 months. That's what we typically see from the time that we've created the position and we're ready to advertise to actually selection and bringing them on board, about 2.5 months.
Okay, thank you.
Our next agenda item under new business is item B. This is resolution number 1722-19. This is discussion, approval, disapproval of a resolution of the Town of Florence and Pinal County, Arizona, amending the Florence Town Council Rules of Procedure effective December 18th, 2019. Ms. Lisa Garcia.
Mayor and members of council, from time to time, we get a request to change the council's rules and procedures. It was actually the mayor who came in and asked for this to be placed on the agenda. If you see on the request for council action form, it shows you what item has been asked to be amended, and it reads, "The consent agenda includes items that are of such a nature that discussion may not be required and included in the annual budget." Number 3 are underneath, and this is where it changed, $100,000 expense to the general fund, and then it adds in item 4, items that are in the HERF or enterprise funds that expenditures are concluded in the CIP. This means you will still have a $100,000 expenditure cap on items from the general fund that will be placed on the consent agenda, but if we have a road project or another project that's within the CIP, it will automatically, it's already been approved by council to be able to go out to bid, so we'll place those items directly onto the consent agenda. Council at the time of the meeting has the right to pull any item off consent agenda to discuss. Any other items that council would like to change? Obviously, this is your policies, your procedures, and we're here to help change those.
So the reason this agenda item came up in meeting and talking with Lisa about some of our meetings, some of the agenda items we had already talked about publicly, as well as during our work sessions regarding, HERF items, street improvement, good gravy, street improvements, things of that nature. We already asked all of those questions that already had been presented. In the agenda packets, the items will still be very detailed, very explanatory. However, there will be a reduced amount of time re-explaining all of that to public. However, if there's questions, comments, or concerns, we can still pull it at that time, but in reflecting over the past year, nobody had any questions, nobody had any comments, nobody had any concerns. So we were going through these agenda items with, again, the information being re-explained to everybody, and it was already there and self-explanatory for anybody to read and discuss. So are there any questions, comments, concerns from council about this item? Okay, with that, I need a motion.
Make a motion to approve resolution 1722-19.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Item 11 is our work session on streetlight improvement ordinance and policy. This is presented by both Chris Salas and Lisa Garcia.
Mayor, members of council. Mayor, members of council, this is our long-awaited Streetlight Improvement District work session. We came to you when we were in the adoption process for SLID 4 and SLID 5, stating that we would go through the process of what a SLID is and how it's formed. So we're going to do that tonight. So November 7th, 2005, the then council made a decision as part of the Growing Smarter initiative that new construction would pay for itself. Council did adopt an ordinance that is in the current code, and what it states basically is that commercial and residential developers will be responsible for the design, installation, and energizing of streetlights. Once the development has been turned over and SLIDs have been formed, then residents are then within that SLID area are then in charge of responsible for paying electricity operation and maintenance. The ordinance is effective for all of the town of Florence, and that means that any development that happens anywhere inside of the town of Florence city limits would have SLIDs from 2005 to current and future, unless council changes that. Underneath the Arizona state statutes, it says we can charge $1.20 per $100 assessed evaluation. So if we take an example of a minimum home being $200,000, that means the town of Florence would collect $240. At the time when the town of Florence created SLIDs, we were collecting at the maximum rate. So that's about 2006 to 2012. And in 2012, the town of Florence stopped collecting the SLIDs because we had a surplus of funds available to pay those. So you can see the SLID map because now we have SLIDs 1 through 5, but currently, and SLID 1 was adopted in 2005, SLID 2, 2006, SLID 3, 2007, SLID 4 and 5, both of 2019. We've also listed the account balances, and if you remember during our truth in taxation hearings, we discussed the fact that SLID number 3 was once again going to start being collected this fiscal year. SLID 1 is not, we're not thinking that we're going to collect funds from SLID 1 until 2022, 2023, and in SLID 2, it's just a little further out, 2024, 2025. Now, within SLID 3, we went ahead and added the rate plus the assessed evaluation to show that a property owner within SLID 3 now is paying $24 a year, so it's nowhere near the maximum amount that could be paid by a property owner. We went ahead and went back, and our finance staff went ahead and contacted APS and other BIA, which is San Carlos Irrigation Project. And we, by street number, collected the information to show that non-SLID areas pay $43,260, while the current SLID areas pay $87,841. We do want to note for the record that the town of Florence has 14 active development agreements for future residential areas. Those are areas that have already been platted and have a DA, but have not yet developed. So underneath the current code, they would also be SLID areas. And within the Merle Ranch area, approximately 35% of that has been built to date.
I thought a few graphics might be helpful tonight to kind of show over some of the densities of the different subdivisions. These were not necessarily handpicked to prove one point or another. These were just considered very typical. So we chose an area, not myself, but the GIS department chose an area representing of Anthem. And so what we look at is we look at the amount of density, if you will, to try to compare. And in this particular subdivision, there's 22.2 street lights per lane mile, which would kind of equal out about 238 feet between street lights. Now, that doesn't mean they're exactly 238 feet. This is just a running average. And again, this was chosen by the GIS department as just one area that was, and again, be careful, look at the red line. It does not include all the street lights on the collector road. This is just the residential areas to try to compare apples to apples. Downtown Florence, about 55 to 60% greater at 314.29 feet average between street lights. But one of the other things you might notice is that there is a larger distance between the actual streets. So there's two things working here, total density and then individual density per lane mile. So there's, like I said, there's two things here. You'll see that there's much larger areas between, and so you'll actually have just total less light in the area. Sunrise Estates. This is the most current subdivision that has been built in the downtown area, if you will, and has the more modern street lights. So this is what you'd see typical of new development. You would see a street light at every intersection or at the end of each cul-de-sac. So as you can kind of see throughout here, that's very typical. And this is 346 feet average between street lights, which is again, almost about 75% less dense than Anthem at Merle Ranch. That is a good example of what modern subdivisions look like. If you were to choose something in Casa Grande, if you were to choose something in the city of Maricopa that's not part of their dark sky area, this is what it would typically look like. Florence Gardens, 446 feet between street lights, and you can just see very quickly, if we look at North Ohio Avenue, street light in that area, Wisconsin Avenue, one in that long distance. North Dakota Avenue, one in that long distance. So you see much greater spacing between streetlights. The total streetlights in Streetlight Improvement District 1, 238 streetlights. Again, just to kind of give everyone an understanding of how many total streetlights there are in each one. 265 in District 2, 283 in District 3, and in the entire downtown area, there's only 389 streetlights.
As part of what we're doing, we've discussed several times with council over the last year, the ability to go back in and develop SLID areas in areas that were established prior to 2005. Also, the discussion came up of what would happen if we annexed in an area that did not have a SLID. Would we require a SLID? So in ordinance number 686, we have added language that would allow the town of Florence to initiate a SLID process. And that would be that if the council so chose, we could go in and put a petition on any area, or if the council was looking at doing a pre-annexation development agreement with anyone, we could go, that already had existing homes, we could go ahead and say, as part of your annexation, you have to sign off on the creation of a SLID by doing this. And it would give the council the authority to do those things if council so chose. And then we also, next slide. And then we also updated the policy. It's still in a draft format, but we wanted to have you to have that as well. It sets out the adoption process for both the unanimous and the majority. Remember, unanimous petitions happen when a single developer is signing off prior to the development of the land. A majority petition is one that is much like an annexation. You have to get 51% of the property owners to sign off, and you also have to have assessed evaluation, and they get to go through the right to where they have the ability to be heard if they are not in favor of the SLID formation. It also sets the process for how we notify APS, the assessors, and the Department of Revenue for being able to start the collection of SLIDs, and it creates a uniform SLID petition so that everyone uses the same petition. That would make it easier for the town attorney and myself when we are looking at petitions.
One of the things, Lisa, though, is that in the new policy, moving forward, all new development has to be unanimous.
That is in the ordinance, and the new policy will say that it must happen at plat time as well.
What we went through in one of the most recent SLIDs was the difficulty of gathering all the signatures. And so it was rather cumbersome for Pulte, the town of Florence. It used up unnecessary staff time, and all the way around was much more difficult than it needed to be. And so the revision was made to require unanimous petitions moving forward for new development.
So we were also asked questions about if the council wanted to dissolve or change SLIDs that are currently in place, how would that have to happen? So it would require a resolution, and the resolution would state who would absorb the costs. Town would absorb the assets, the liability, and the existing reserves. Abolishing or changing the resolution will change the original intent of the ordinance, but council does have that right. You can look at anything from keeping it as is to removing certain sections, or even the town of Florence paying for a portion of the cost for electrical. And we looked up the state statute, all of that's in place. It just depends on what the council wants to do. And at this time, we'll take any questions or any clarifications. We can back up and go through some slides. We just really want to make sure that we've answered all the questions. The main questions we had was the Anthem service area a greater level of service than the town core Florence Gardens? I believe we've answered that question. The other question we had was, could SLIDs be dissolved? I believe we've answered that question. But we are here to answer any questions that the council may have, or to bring it back for a work session on another day if council would so choose.
Council, are there any questions? Vice Mayor?
Yes, something that Lisa and I have talked about for the downtown area. If they make any modifications to the infrastructure for lighting, do they have to create a slid?
If any area approached the town and they wanted to increase the level of service that they were provided, the town of Florence could ask for them to do a slid, just like if any area had asked for additional improvements or costs, the town of Florence would have the right to create an improvement district. In 1992-4, the town of Florence did create an improvement district to take over the responsibility for the North Florence Improvement District, that's what we call it, but it's the North Wastewater Treatment Plant. The same things can happen with the SLID as well.
So if we want to go to LED lighting, we'd have to.
You do, if we wanted to go, so this is an interesting thing that I'll let Chris speak to, but if the town of Florence wanted to do an initiative to create LED lighting, there's several ways to be able to do that, and that's typically a cost savings. Mr. Salas?
The current policy is, again, new development, so I don't think there's anything specific to discuss about modifications. That would be something that would have to be looked at more.
In our new ordinance, that's in our new ordinance, that the council can do a petition, or they can do a petition to improve.
Okay, apparently then it is in the new ordinance, the modification part, so that's something subject to your request?
That would be if the council wanted to initiate a petition. Our new policy and our new ordinance does allow for that. And it also allows for, our previous ordinance allowed for only unanimous petitions, but Mr. Billingsley did a land use clarification agreement to allow for majority petition to occur within SLID number 4, and from that time forward, all petitions will be done at platting time, which will be a unanimous petition. What we're talking about is when council went forth and asked if they would have the ability to ask other areas to be able to form SLIDs, or if we were going through a annexation process and the annexation area asked for improved lightings, if we would make that option available. So by allowing for council to initiate a majority petition, that does make that option available.
Can we get a copy of your presentation?
It was passed out tonight, but I can send it to you electronically if you prefer.
Yes, please.
I'd be happy to, sir.
Councilmember Larson?
Just to clarify some things that were said, so what you're saying is if say the downtown area decided that they wanted to be a streetlight improvement district to improve their lighting and add more lighting, would they be able to come to the town and ask?
Yes, once we have a majority petition, it does allow the council to initiate. If someone asks, then you could initiate a streetlight improvement district. That means that the council would map the district. So your staff would go back and map it. And then if it was a council-initiated petition, we would pay all costs associated with the initiation.
Okay, so we would just
It
have
would
to-
not be a developer paying for the costs.
Another thing that was brought up previously, and I apologize if I missed it, but we had talked previously about the funding mechanism for the existing SLIDs. And I know that John Anderson, as well as myself, had mentioned going through and finding which lights would normally have been covered under HERF, and then talking about those individual lights being paid for out of HERF, so they're not being paid for by the individual homeowners because they would have normally been paid out of HERF funds. Is that something that we could still discuss under this current policy or possibly change?
I'll refer this to Chris because I'm not aware of which lights would be HERF and which lights would not be.
We had talked about our primary arterial roadways and looking at the density of those lights. That's what I understood was the clarification between the two.
The town, with direction, will look at best practices that are done across. I have spoken to the public works director across the valley. It's hard to figure out exactly which cities or towns really mimic our structure as it relates to the amount of, the way that HERF funds are distributed in each city is very different. So we will have to absolutely look at that comprehensively and boil that down and come back to council and provide some type of report. I do know it is done, but like you said, there's also the difference between what would be on the arterial and collector road within like the city of Peoria, and then what is done in their subdivisions, which would be in a SLID, and then as well as what you're seeing in Anthem, where you're seeing additional lighting that is done by the development community as well. So we'd have to look at all of that, and that could definitely be done.
I guess I just have an issue with the taxpayers individually having to pay for those lightings that would normally come out of their taxes and the HERF funds, that they're having to pay an additional for that. So I guess to me, it makes sense that we would do an analysis of those lights that we have out there currently to see if they would qualify for normal HERF funding as it currently stands in our policy today.
That's why when we looked at the different levels and different areas and went back and did the research, we found that some municipalities do partake in a small share, 25% or less share of the cost of the streetlights. It would have to be an analysis we would do, but that's why we went in and said that that resolution would allow council to modify, if that's what council chose to do, and do so in any way.
Yeah. I guess I'd like to hear what other people think about that personally.
I think that's a good idea. That we,
Councilmember, oh, go ahead, Vice Mayor, I'm so sorry.
I think it's a good idea that we look at the density of the lights and figure out a way to share the HERF fund on that so that we all get a share of the HERF fund, but do it proportional.
Is that with respect to collectors and arterials, as Councilmember Larson asked as well? Or is that, what is that with respect to, sir?
All lighting.
Okay.
Councilmember Wall?
I have a question about how the density of street lighting is determined. Is that a code, or is that determined by the developer? How is the cost passed along to the taxpayer based on whose decision?
I can answer that directly and hopefully with a little bit of an analogy. So at the top level, we have our federal government, and certain establishments like the FHWA, they create a certain amount of guidelines for us. And then at the local level, we often have the state adopting some of those and turning them into codes. And then on our level, we have the adoption of what we have is typically of like MAG standards. And so what we see is AASHTO is a guideline at the highest level, but if you pull anybody's standards, I don't care if it's Chandler, Peoria, everyone will reference a table that shows the exact same thing as an AASHTO. So it starts off as a guideline here and then becomes at a local level what we've adopted for our code as an engineering standard. On streetlights, we have the very same thing. We have a couple different organizations. AASHTO has a book out right now that has covered streetlights, but then references another federal guideline on that. And those, again, are just guidelines. They're best practices to provide a minimal amount of lighting for vehicle and pedestrian safety. So on our level right now, we were in the process of developing a standard that we're still working on. It is finalized, but it still needs to probably go over some initial critique and review, especially as these policies may be influencing that. But currently, as it relates to our single developer, essentially, in Pulte, and then D.R. Horton has the same engineer, they are to submit a plan that is to their standard, which is greater than our standard. And so that is the standard that they've been using in the development since 2003 or 4.
So basically, the developer is determining what the cost to the taxpayer will be for the installation of the streetlights. Is that correct?
That would be a fair statement in the fact that their standard would be greater than a lower standard. Just like it would be their prerogative to build a extra thick asphalt road or an extra wide road greater than our standards, a catch basin that was greater than our capacity standards. So they're always able to provide us greater infrastructure than they want. They just cannot provide less than what we do. So typically, on some of these examples I'm giving you, again, there are established criteria that we use to determine a minimum standard. And I will be honest, a lot of times Pulte would prefer to do a little bit more than the minimal standard. that is good for us in our long-term infrastructure, typically speaking.
But maybe not so good for the taxpayer.
Well, we have to just note for the record that when the town of Florence went forward in 2005 and created this, it was the exact same time that Anthem Merrill Ranch came in, Merrill Ranch came in with their standards. And so this was one of the things that was determined that we would do and move forward with SLIDs for growth paying for itself. That means that they came forward, they brought a mock-up of what it was going to look like, what set of standards that they were going to put in place for the Merrill Ranch area, and they went in and developed the code at that time for streetlight improvements districts to be created prior to the development of the very first portion of Anthem at Merrill Ranch.
And Pulte did develop an actual set of guidelines, which they submitted to the Public Works Department way before me, but was accepted and or approved by then Public Works Director. So it was not something that was undetermined. It was something that, again, that they at that time said, this is what we want to provide to the residents as a total experience in Anthem. But obviously it can be looked upon and evaluated differently moving forward.
Thank you.
Councilmember Cortez?
So I have a question, and I don't even know if it is going to make sense, but it makes sense to me right at the moment. So it's hard to compare these two, but I'm going to anyways, and understanding that one is private and one is public. So we brought up at another meeting our parks needing some lights. And then the conversation happens at Anthem a lot that the parks need more lights, because lights is what detours people vandalizing your park or hanging out or sleeping in them or whatever. So just so I'm clear, because I can't seem to get my mind on this, if we improve our lighting system, say at the park, who covers that expense?
But we can't do that.
Yeah, the general fund would. The town's general
Okay.
fund. It would be Mr.
Wait.
Hughes's.
Thank you.
I don't think you understand what the question is. Which park is she talking about? Is she talking about the parks inside Anthem?
I apologize. I thought I understood
I was talking about the
question.
park here.
Yes.
Because we were talking about the parks here. If we improve the lighting at the park here, Heritage Park, who covers that expense of the lights and the maintenance of those lights? Is that going to become its own SLID, or is that going to just fall under our normal?
No, those aren't streetlights, so that would be designed using general fund, installed using general fund, maintained, and the power bill paid for by general fund.
Thank you. I really just was having difficulty putting my mind around that, so thank you.
Vice Mayor, did you have something?
Well, no, I was just, I'm still concerned about the town charging disproportionately for these lights, street lights between our citizens. We have, just people downtown get free lights, and people in Anthem don't get free lights. The people in the Five Parks area, they don't have a lot of lights, but they don't pay for anything for their lights. So I just think we need to figure out a way to proportionally pay for these within these SLIDs.
I think we should note for the record that very soon you're going to see 2 additional streetlight improvement districts coming before council, and this will be in a non-Anthem at Merrill Ranch area.
More so reason to get it done proportionally before we bring more in.
Are there any other questions or comments to the right? No. Okay. All right, so go ahead.
I was just going to ask when we could expect an analysis of that, or when we could expect to see some numbers, comparative, like what is covered under the HERF funding for the rest of the citizens versus what could be, I guess, dollar signs for the Anthem area or other SLIDs.
That's difficult to speak to right this day. Oftentimes, the other directors may take a little bit of time to get back to me. So it could be, I'm gonna be guessing early in February, depending on the holidays and people's responses back. Again, this is not a simple question of how you just pay for the street lights, because I've had this conversation. There's many other parts that kind of come into it, and how their funds are either shared throughout, or again, there are several cities who have, like City of Phoenix and Mesa, who have alternative means to, again, pay for their roads, additional taxes in that. So it's gonna take a little bit of time.
Okay, thank you.
We're not being asked to approve anything tonight, are we?
This is a work session. If we've met all of the questions from council, then what we would do is we would move both the ordinance and the resolution forward. But what I'm hearing from council is we have not fulfilled the answers, so we will come back again. And as Chris said, it'll probably be in February, because to look up best practices, convert that into what the town of Florence can do, it's going to take some time.
All right, well, thank you very much. Our next item is the manager's report.
Madam Mayor, members of council, I'm going to be very brief. Earlier this evening, specifically at 5:30, there was a volunteer recruitment meeting at the Library and Community Center for powwow. I've mentioned this a couple of times before, but I wanted to mention it again tonight. We need more volunteers. At this time, we think we have about 24 volunteers. We need about 40. And staff, yes, Brian? They have 40 now after the meeting? 48. So maybe we're covered. Very good. Thank you very much. Our first powwow is Saturday, November 23rd at the Community Center parking lot from 8 to 11. So be there or be square. Secondarily, Fire Department wanted me to announce that we will be starting our second CERT course in January. So the first class date will be January the 6th. That's a 5-week course for Florence CERT. So please get the word out. From what I understand, I talked to the CERT team manager last week. We went to lunch with Dave, and we've got a good group of volunteers. And I believe he said the other day, Dave, that he had 12 people that were interested in the next course, but they'd like to get a few more folks interested. So if you could get the word out, that'd be great. Lastly,
Is that on our website?
I'm sorry?
Is that on the website?
Website, Facebook,
I don't.
and
Yes.
Thank
Ben is giving me a solid yes.
I
Lastly, I have some good news here. Our 2019 Community Development Block Grant application has been approved. If you recall, that is what we're calling the Barrier Removal Project. So those are the ADA improvements over near Florence K8. So that has been approved by the state. That's all I had for this evening.
thank you very much. This is our second call to the public. Is there anybody at this time that would like to speak? Mr. Beatty.
Good evening again, Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members. I just wanted to say thank you for the direction you're going with the economic development. It sounds like we're moving forward and looking at the feasibility of it. And I know a lot of people talked about it, so I won't bother you with any more. But I know that economic development not only brings new businesses here, but it also improves the lives of the businesses that are already here and making their lives easier, which I think we can all get behind. So thank you, and that's all I have. You have a good evening.
Thank you so much. Anybody else at this time? And closing call to the public. Call to the council for current events only. Councilmember Hawkins.
Well, I'd like to start out with telling that our citizens, you know, there's a lot of falsehoods, and they seem to take on a life of their own once they're put out there. But there's a lot of falsehoods about saying that the town has no direction, that we don't care about the future of downtown, that we're doing things to make it into a ghost town. You know, you can't believe rumors. if you're really interested, you need to watch the meetings or come to the meetings and find out what's truly happening. Because tonight well, I think every night, we prove over and over that we're trying to move ahead, we're trying to help the businesses, not hurt them, that we do have a plan forward. We're working on our latest strategic plan right at the moment. But, you know, people, they can't, it's just frustrating that people believe everything they hear on Facebook or however they get their information rather than coming and finding out the facts. You know, that hurts us as much as anything when our own citizens are coming off with falsehoods. It doesn't help us bring in new people when they, you know, I don't know how they do it. I'm not a techie person, but, you know, somebody that's planning on coming here to open a business or buy a home or whatever, you know, if they see that on social media, they might just close the book on us and look for another community without even finding out if it's fact or fiction. So it would really help the community if people would stop spreading falsehoods. If they've got a question, get a hold of any of your councilmen, any of the staff. You know, the newspaper gives a pretty good report every week on what we do at the meetings. Read the local paper. That would help too. But like I say, you need to really find out the facts before you read something and then you retweet it or you Facebook it or however you do it. You know, that's not helping the town move forward. Those people are hurting the town. It's not the council or staff or even the county, as we found out tonight, how they've been moving forward and we're working with them. It would help if people would just do that. And I want to remind everybody, you know, the Junior Parade is coming up, not this Friday, but the 29th, 30th, and 31st. We'll be having the parade on the 30th, on Saturday, downtown. And let's see, there was something. And on the third Fridays that the business community has put together, it's on the third Friday of each month. Got entertainment. You got all the stores are open till 8 o'clock at night. And there's food vendors, there's entertainers. It's a fun time. But anyway, I just wanted to remind everybody on that also. And come on down and participate, weather permitting. That's all I have.
Thank you. Councilmember Wall?
I just want to thank the Chamber and the Florence Music Festival for coming forward and offering to put on two what I think will be great events. I snatched up 4 tickets to the music festival when they first were sold at a discount, but even at the current price, they are a bargain for 2 days worth of music and fun. So I want to thank both of you, and I'm really happy that the town is able to participate with you on those 2 great events. That's all I have.
Councilmember Hughes? Councilmember Larson?
I just want to recognize some of the great things that we're doing in our town. We do have the drive-in movie through our Parks and Rec. It looks like it's Aladdin. Is it the old Aladdin or the new one? The new one, that's the better one. They're both great. But that is, correct me if I'm wrong, Friday the 22nd, right? Fantastic. And then obviously Saturday we have powwow, so it's just a whole weekend. Just spend the whole weekend downtown, you're good. And then Junior Parada is coming up on the 30th, 10 a.m., like he had mentioned as well. I guess overall tonight, I guess I get sort of frustrated whenever we have these conversations about things like economic development or special projects, because serving on the budget committee for the past 2 years, I've taken a lot of pride in trying to push some of these things forward. And every time we run such a thin budget, and it's so narrow, it's almost impossible. You can fight all you want for these projects and for these things, and it's almost impossible to find the money. So having these discussions sort of just frustrates me, because when we sit in the room and we're making these decisions, there's really not the extra money to be running around willy-nilly just throwing at projects. So I'm hopeful that this time around we can allocate some money, we can find it somewhere, we can figure it out in a different way than we've thought about it in the past. But I think that, yeah, it's definitely the budget season is when we need to be making these decisions. This is when we need to be having this discussion, not just looking at the numbers and saying, yep, looks good. We need to be fighting for our projects at that time, because otherwise we run into the same thing where we're waiting. And I hate waiting. I'm the most impatient person. And you guys know that about me. But yeah, so I'm really hoping that next time the budget season comes around, we can really dig into the budget and actually get some of these things addressed at that point when they need to be, instead of missing that boat. So that's my rant. Otherwise, I've got nothing. So hope you guys have a great rest of your holidays.
Councilmember Cortez.
So I attended the third Friday. I've attended both of them, and they're fantastic. So I had a conversation with several people on Main Street, and since we're kind of in this mood today, I'll just go ahead and say it. They asked why I was the only council member they saw at both of these events. So they would like for me to formally invite all of council to please come. And I don't leave the one spot I'm in, so I personally can't say who is on Main Street and who's not on Main Street during this event. I stay in my one little spot. My son volunteers at the fudge shop, so he helps her during that event. And so that's usually where I'm at. So if you were there, apologies that you were not noticed, but an official invite has been sent out to everybody, including staff, to please come and support what they're trying to do on Main Street. I attended the first Sip and Shop at the Windmill Winery, and that was fantastic as well. And I think it's gonna be just like our third Fridays. It's gonna end up being an event that they'll have constantly. And it's neat to see the vendors that were there. They had local artists there. They had local vendors. They had a chocolate lady. They had the lady that makes the cards, who is getting very involved in things. So plus then you get to taste the wine. I didn't taste any wine that day though. And I want to remind everybody to shop small and shop local. Every time you spend your dollars in our small town, it helps our small town improve, which then helps us all economically survive and supports kids in baseball and dance or whatever their parents put them in. But I think I saw a commercial today. American Express is like the leader of shop small, shop local. And I think they said that when you spend your money locally, 86% of it, I think it was, they said stays locally versus going outside of your area. So I always want to just encourage everybody to please, when you can, spend your dollars here in our great town of Florence.
Thank you. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. The town manager and several of the town employees and I attended the Joint Operations Center this past Saturday. And this was sponsored by the Pinal County Office of Emergency Management and the Arizona Homeland Security. It was an interesting project. It was a recap, or I don't know how to explain it, but it was a recap of the shooting that we attended, several months ago, and it was a simulation of what was going on And there was so much stuff going on, even though I was a part of that at the time, I didn't realize everything that was going on in the background. And what this brought up is all the stuff that the town and the county has to do in the time of emergency. And we talked about how do you get the bills paid? Who's going to pay the bills? Who's authorized to pay the bills? You know, if we have a major disaster, you know, if one of our buildings gets destroyed, how do we replace that? How do we get people to work? We talked about, you know, if we have a disaster where people are killed, for example. You know, we volunteered to use our community center as a point where we could have counselors there if need to be. There was, you know, so much went on. I want to suggest that we have Chief Strayer have a meeting sometime to debrief the council and the citizens on what this is all about, you know, and let people know that our police department and our fire department have plans in place to try to help us, but they can't do it all, and there's things that we can do to help them. Would you go along with that, Chief? Good, good. So, and also, the county has suggested that we do an MOU to formalize some of these things between the, you know, the town and the county. We talked about what happens to the courts if the courthouse gets bombed or something. We have to, you know, the judges, where are they going to have court the next day? Well, they're putting things in place, and we talked about using the different JP sites in the county now. But it's interesting, you know, to go through all this. I'm very pleased that I was allowed to attend that. Thank you. Other thing that I have is a concern about the maintenance and the right-of-ways in Merrill Ranch. I've talked to the town manager about this. I'm not too happy with the answer that he got from Pulte. Out on American Way, there's probably over 100 plants that are either missing or dead. Pulte's response, if I got this right, Brent, you can correct me. Pulte's response was, we'll go close off all those emitters so you can't see where the plants are missing. So that's not very acceptable. But, you know, my question to, you know, the town staff is, on our right-of-ways, what are we going to do about maintaining those right-of-ways? Because there's a current problem and there's a future problem. What happens when Pulte pulls out? You know, maybe it's 10 years, maybe 20 years from now, but there's some point in time, the town's going to have to take over the maintenance of those, unless we have an ironclad agreement with the HOA. So I'd like to pass that on to you, Brent, that we either get these fixed or we take over maintenance of it, one or the other. We get rid of it, all the plants, and just go desert.
So we do have an ironclad IGA that requires all of those right-of-ways and open areas to be fully funded and maintained by the HOA. Pulte's response was that they have a set budget that is approved by the HOA, I guess, which is primarily Pulte. In terms of the maintenance dollars provided every year, part of that is replacement of plants. And based on their meetings that occur, they decide which streets they're gonna focus on to plant new trees or plant new shrubs. This year's approved corridor is Merrill Ranch Parkway. They will have meetings in the future where they will determine how that funding is spent in future years, but it's a process where residents of the Anthem community need to work through the HOA with respect to what those priorities are and where your HOA dollars are spent.
We have no voice in that. That's all Pulte. So you know, the homeowners out there have absolutely no voice in the HOA. As a matter of fact, you know, there's 3 corporations there. There's Parkside, there's Sun City, and then there's the Common Ground. The Common Ground contract very specifically says it's not an HOA. And there's not any members of that except the Pulte Board of Directors. So somehow we have to put the pressure on Pulte. Maybe we need to quit approving new plots until they can get their act together. They're sure charging us enough, right? You think they're charging us enough?
Oh, I think they charge us too
Okay.
much, but we chose to live there.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Oh, one other thing I wanted to do, I wanted to end on a positive note. I want to thank everybody and the council particularly for Vet Memorial. That was such a neat deal that we had on Veterans Day. And I want to suggest to Brian that we keep this thing going. It's been suggested to me that maybe we have some sort of photo contest for the Eagle. Maybe 4th of July, we try to tie something together, essay contest or something like that with the schools, and have people write about freedom and, you know, maybe do a presentation next to the Eagle or something like that. But if you would think about that, see if you can come up with some ways we can continue to take advantage of our site. I don't know who was telling me, I guess it was Ben was telling me that he's seeing out his window people coming up and taking pictures every day of our Eagle. So I'm so pleased that we were able to do that. And, you know, that's going to be a destination site for us. Thank you.
One of the things Vice Mayor spoke of at the Veterans Memorial was continuing to feed the Eagle. That's very inspiring. This Thursday, I want to suggest and build off of the suggestion you just made. This Thursday is our youth council's meeting. Perhaps Councilmember Larson could bring it to the youth to brainstorm some ideas for some of these contests or ways to incorporate the Eagle, and, you know, they would be excited and disseminate that information, you know, once it's finalized to their schools.
I'd love to bring it to them.
This past Friday, over at the community center parking lot, we had our annual Relay for Life. So I did a quick blur through the town the third Friday. But a lady that I worked with many years ago was on our team, and she had not come through Florence since her son graduated high school, you know, about four years back. And she said, I can't believe how alive Main Street is. There's music, there's stores open. I've never seen that. And when I went in on Saturday to the Fudge Shop and Bucks for Style, Kim had tears in her eyes afterwards, just so excited because our business owners are making a positive impact in our community. It's important to give credit where credit's due, and this is something that it was their initiative. They brought it forward, and they're doing a great job. Businesses that are in our community, if you haven't joined the chamber, that's another opportunity to engage and be involved, and they have First Thursdays. So we have a lot of exciting things coming on. The 2 festivals that we approved this evening, the Arts Festival and the Music Festival. One of the things I love to tell people about Florence is you could come here every month and have something really exciting to do. We have wonderful events, and we have multiple events each month. So we're doing fantastic. Powwow is this Saturday. I'm excited. I'm really happy that we're able to bring, you know, healthy choices at a low cost to our community. So I'll be out there volunteering. And I'm happy about this. So without further delay, I know we have a executive session this evening. So with that, I need a motion.
Make a motion to adjourn to executive
Oh,
session.
wait. Before you do that, can I say one more thing? I almost forgot. Brian, after the meeting, I'd like to talk to you a little bit more in depth, but I had a resident that reached out to me yesterday and I did not have a chance to touch base. But I think it's something that's important and I want to put out there for everybody to hear. Holidays, we do a lot, especially, for the children in the community. Somebody had another perspective. We have a lot of elderly, a lot of seniors that, either they're struggling with food, they don't have companionship, and she was wondering if we could touch base and get something going, whether it's, adopt a grandparent. Yes, thank you. I was looking for a name, but I told her that I would touch base with you, get some information and relay it back, and maybe that could get another program going, a spring off from our senior center services. So with that, I need a motion.
Make a motion to adjourn to executive session?
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. All opposed, same side. Motion carries.